Afternoon and good evening to the rest of you guys. We are back. I am in my mother's basement and we are here for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am joined today by our guest, Todd Ault, the founder and president of Ault Management Group, as well as BitNile. Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Q. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those who aren't aware of sort of who Todd is and what you have done, can you give a little bit of background on sort of your work with the management group?
Well, I've been at Alton Company, a private company, and the public company BitNile, which is on the New York American. I've been on Wall Street for about 33 years, sort of not off and on. There was like a short hiatus, but for the most part, I've bought and sold companies. I was the founder of Patient Safety. I was a large owner of Jack in the Box at one time, Taco Cabana. I've had a lot of exits, and we've been building a Bitcoin company. We've been really building a holding company, which you can see where our price is pretty depressed. We have a lot of assets, and people, I think no matter what we say, they don't really understand it. But one of the core things is that I bought Digital Power back in late 2016, and it made power supplies. And I learned pretty quickly how much power was needed for Bitcoin, and that piqued my interest. I actually started mining Bitcoin in 2012 with a friend of mine, Crypto Joe, who works for me still. And trust me, we've made a lot of mistakes. So we are not experts in this. We've made a lot of mistakes.
I love the humility because I don't feel like anyone in this space really believes that they are an expert. And if they say they are, they're just full of shit. But I want to ask you, Todd, you mentioned the fact that you guys started mining back in 2012. How were you first? Was it Crypto Joe that introduced you to Bitcoin, or how were you introduced to Bitcoin?
Yeah, he really introduced it to me. He was a part of some gaming thing called Immortal, and he used CPUs at our office. I don't really understand how it was done back then. He just used what looked like a basic computer, maybe a little more power. I think back in the early days, it wasn't as hard to mine. And unfortunately, we weren't as diligent about keeping it back then as we should have been.
Oh, no.
Yeah, one guy that worked for us had about 5,000 coins, sold it for $5, about 25 grand. So, yeah, we've had some pretty horrific stupidity. It's not been pleasant, that part of it, because you later on, if you don't understand what you're doing in the beginning. But Bitcoin wasn't Bitcoin in the beginning. When it was $5, it was a novelty. It was something that was like, I don't know how familiar you guys are, but like you used to have to just transfer your Bitcoin and then people would send you cash in the mail. It wasn't really acceptable behavior, if you know what I'm saying. I didn't do it, but some people that work for us would transfer the Bitcoin to a wallet and then hope the cash came back.
I'm curious, in these early days, were you and your team looking at Bitcoin as sort of an asset class, a tech vehicle, or what was it to you guys? Just fun internet money?
It was a novelty at the time. I don't think we on the team really understood it. I feel like it was like a novelty out of 2008, sort of debacle. It was really a novelty. I actually, as a Wall Street guy, sort of like poo-pooed it pretty hard, and unfortunately, Wall Street's very traditional, and you see that with Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. You see this mentality of like that, how could that possibly be worth anything? And you see that sort of ingrained in old school behavior. And I think it wasn't really until the use case happened that I started understanding that this is really a more pure asset and sort of not corruptible. Because in the beginning stages of, I think about the Mt. Gox days, and I will get a little bit further along, where the exchange was hacked. I think people confused that Bitcoin wasn't hacked, but the exchange was hacked, right? And it took a little bit of like digging to understand that Bitcoin's never been hacked itself. The people that control the Bitcoin, they've done stupid things. They've allowed themselves to be hacked. Now, by the way, I shouldn't say stupid things because we've been under a denial of service attack for 4 days. So we got to make sure that we're not stupid either and let our Bitcoin get hacked either. Although we do custodian at a major custodian in New York. So
Alex, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Just real quick, speaking of denial of service attacks, have you seen Michael Saylor's proposal for Twitter and also just any platform using Bitcoin and Lightning as a way to filter out Signal and good faith internet actors from all the rest by way of a small Bitcoin deposit of like 100 or 1,000 sats?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea a lot. He is Michael Saylor is a literally, as everyone probably knows, an MIT graduate. So he's like truly a rocket scientist. He comes up with concepts that obviously you have to. I mean, I admire the guy. He's actually one of the reasons why I got so interested in reading his stuff over time. And believe it or not, I tried to convince my company to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet a lot sooner. They were not comfortable, and then of course he did, and then Tesla did, and we just thought it would be me too to announce that we were doing the same thing, and we really wanted to be in mining. So, but he's had a big influence on some of my decision making, which is him and a guy named Greg Foss.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, Greg has had a huge influence on me. So what I think about when I think about what Saylor's talking about with a little deposit is he's basically talking about digital recognition. He's talking about like in sort of the purest form that you have to verify who you are effectively. So conceptually, I don't know how it would work, but I think that he's usually onto something that probably makes a lot of sense. I read the Lightning proposal, but only on a few of his posts, and I think it's interesting. He also put out a proposal about, I think that's the same proposal actually, where you get an orange certification.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the concept a lot.
Todd, I'm curious. You're talking a little bit about the fact that MicroStrategy put some Bitcoin on reserves. Tesla did the same. You guys explored that possibly. In the article that I read of yours about 6 months ago now, you urged the Federal Reserve to actually go out and buy $500 billion worth of Bitcoin. I'd love for you to expand on that. Like, take this opportunity to speak directly to Chairman Powell, lead him to the promised land.
Yeah. So if you look at what the Chinese did, we were already committed to mining at that point. We started mining in 2000, I think 17, 18, really kind of blew it with S9s and kind of, made some mistakes again. But we eventually bought our own data center. And when we committed to mining, we saw the Chinese pull out and basically say it wasn't going to be legal. Whoever at the administration basically said, we're not going to make it illegal, effectively told the world, we're going to want to dominate in that space, right? And if you think about dominating in the space of mining and allowing Bitcoin transactions and regulating Bitcoin transactions, and then you look at China going to Kazakhstan and other places that are unstable, the most stable part of the world. I mean, contrary to what a lot of people say that are younger, the US is the most stable part of the world, right? It's the most governed by law. And so there's no better opportunity for the US to lead than to put some asset class on their balance sheet that's going to say the US is modern. The US is going to make sure that it has assets on its balance sheet that make sense. They buy all kinds of mortgage-backed securities. They let them float off over time. The Fed has, through QE and other things, supported the markets during very poor times. And for them to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet and say, hey, we're going to acknowledge this asset class. We're going to be a leader here, and we're going to encourage the US to be leaders in financial products. If you believe, like Greg does and others, that this is a $2 million a coin asset class, sort of like in terms of the trillions, in terms of the size, $45 trillion or bigger, they could lead the way by really taking a big spot of Bitcoin and put it on their balance sheet and leaving it alone. And my case in point is they do this now. They buy and invest large asset classes now into things that otherwise they would be able. So just think about it, supporting the community, supporting the US in being a leader in this space, and also basically sending a signal to everybody that we're going to continue to be a leader. Because if you look at historically, there was a time where Rome was the leader in terms of finance, and then over time the British became the leaders in finance, and then it's been New York, and slowly it's been migrating to Asia as really being the dominant players in finance, Hong Kong, Singapore, et cetera. But the Chinese have made major mistakes there, and I think there's an opening. I think there's an opening for the U.S. to say we're going to modernize and we're going to continue to be leaders in the space and extend the leadership of the New York financial system. And that's because the Chinese are making mistakes. Basically, they're penalizing their own companies. They're penalizing their citizens. They're saying, hey, own our digital currency and you can't own Bitcoin. And I think that in the long run, that hurts the Chinese. And so effectively, if you want to be a leader here, you got to have it on your balance sheet.
I do want to dive a lot more into China and mining, but I want to stay on the US for just a little bit longer. You know, we see a lot of conversations out of DC, different politicians taking multiple sides. We just had the mayor of New York now announce a strange new ruling regarding Bitcoin mining and them only being able to use clean energy to mine Bitcoin in New York City. Talk to us a little bit about maybe some domestic legislative hurdles that you're keeping an eye on that could inhibit this growth.
So we have a plant in Dowagiac that is 617,000 square feet and can go up to around 330 megs. We're not there yet. We're working on it. It's mainly nuclear power, but I think that this, if I were to get to the political side of it, I think this is a political hot, football, but it's not really true. I mean, you think about the delivery of fiat currency around the world, around the U.S. by armored trucks, right? That's not an efficient process. They're not taking electric trucks to deliver this fiat currency. They're not using electricity to print the fiat currency. They're not using electricity to cut down the trees to make the pulp. It's just this is a nonsensical argument. It's not really true. It's made up. The footprint for Bitcoin mining and it being somehow a power grab, and yeah, it uses a lot of power, but relative to the size and scope of it, it's nothing. To me, it's a misnomer. Now, I may be somewhat biased here, but I think that we are, to answer your question, we are nervous about it. And so we are looking pretty heavily in areas where there's hydro, Wisconsin, Maine, other locations where there's hydro. We envision that the politics are going to catch up and we're going to wake up one day with, you get a tax if you mine in Texas, or you get a tax if you mine if you're not a certain percentage of renewable fuel. So we're aware of the stupidity. I think it's stupidity.
You're preaching to the choir here. We keep pounding the drum that these politicians are just talking about Bitcoin to grift for votes more than anything else.
Well, really they do this because whenever a politician says to you, oh, Bitcoin can be used for nefarious purposes, I always say, right. And that's right. Fiat's never used for anything bad. No one's ever used fiat for anything poor. This is the same argument they had about Tesla, where they said, wow, well, the Tesla car caught on fire. The batteries caught on fire. I can tell you personally about car fires that have happened to one of my friends, and the combustion engine, what happens to that. They're simply just demagoguing it and basically saying, hey, look what's happening here. And they treat the public like they're idiots, which fortunately there are people like Saylor and Foss and yourself and others that are saying, hey, let's pay attention to the reality that Bitcoin is not. In fact, you could argue that Bitcoin is so traceable that you can't really recover dollars. It's really difficult to recover dollars. You don't look at serial numbers. Someone at the bank's not looking at every serial number. It's just nonsense. But Bitcoin, a lot of recovery regarding nefarious activity. I don't think I think it's more transparent than anything out there. I mean, sure, you don't have an identification on the wallet to say this is Bob Smith's wallet, but you can trace where it came from. And there's a lot of smart people out there in tech that are tracking down these people that are using it for nefarious purposes.
I love that. I mean, you are preaching to the choir. We're chatting on the side here, just like you get it.
Sure.
But how many of your clients don't get it, and what are those conversations like?
We're gonna have a conference on May 12th to the 15th. One day is a Bitcoin day, which is I think the 14th of May, and which Natalie's going to be there, Greg Foss is going to be there, Thomas Lee is going to be there, Scaramucci is going to be there, and we're going to be talking. But why I bring that up is it's not just a selfless plug, is that those people know about Bitcoin, but the vast majority of people that I meet, and I would, I hate throwing out percentages, but in a rare circumstance, I'll say 95% of the people I meet, even in the financial community, don't understand Bitcoin. They just go, I don't understand it. Can you explain it to me? I don't understand how it has any worth. And they're sort of missing out. And we own a platform called dotcom. We're a 19.9% owner of it. And I dollar cost average into Bitcoin every day. And so recently, some of them have been calling me saying, oh, it's going down. It went down from 43,000 or whatever. Yeah, when I was in Dubai, it went down from 69,000. And I tell them, and Greg says it better than I do. Just, think about earning $1 and taking 5 cents of that dollar and putting in Bitcoin. I do it every day. I average into Bitcoin every single day. But to answer your question specifically, most of them are uneducated about it, or they're fearful of it. Like there's a big unknown for them. They somehow just see it as eclectic in the sky. And I try to explain to them all the time. I said, what if you couldn't get a green dollar? What if there was no paper in your hand? You would just have an entry into your Chase account and you could sell the money, right? So one of the things we're doing is we're putting $100 million over time of Bitcoin into our lender. We're a California licensed lender, and we're lending to public companies, and we're going to let them borrow money in Bitcoin denomination or in fiat denomination, or we can convert into their common stock if they can't pay us back, or for some reason they want to just keep the cash and let us convert. We lend to a lot of public companies now. It's something I've been doing for years. And I think people notionally do not understand the idea of having a bank. Now, we're not a bank, we're a lending institution, so we don't take deposits, but you think about a bank having to put deposits down, we're gonna put Bitcoin in and then wrap that Bitcoin. We're gonna make a loan off the value of the Bitcoin we have, right? And so in theory, we'll be long Bitcoin constantly, and we'll be long the loans we make to the public company. So we have the collateral of the Bitcoin, the collateral of the loan we make to the public company, and then we as an owner are effectively hodling Bitcoin and saying, hey, if that Bitcoin goes higher over time, we can even make more loans, right? Think of it to some degree like a margin loan. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to show people that Bitcoin can be, this is probably, you look like a young guy, but if you go back in, I want to say in the 80s, when Rolling Stone went on tour, they insisted that they were paid in, they were paid in yen, right? And if you think about insisting you're going to get paid in Bitcoin, or dollar denominating that you're going to pay your loan back in Bitcoin. Now that can be a scary proposition right now, because that's why we're going to give them an option, fiat or Bitcoin. But the scary proposition is that Bitcoin's too volatile right now. But over time, as it gets accepted, it'll be less volatile. And I see digital loans being made, backed by Bitcoin. I don't know if I probably went off on a little bit of a tangent there. I'm sorry, but
Todd, do not apologize. I love that tangent. I want to actually ask, and if this is a little bit too much information for you to share publicly, totally fine for you to not answer. I'm curious, how much collateralization would you be giving on a scale of 0 to 100% for Bitcoin as the collateral right now?
If it were a public company and we were comfortable with them, we'd probably give them 70% if they were public, maybe a little more. We don't really do loans to private companies. We specialize in sort of small cap companies under 250 million. But I think you're referring to whether they gave us their Bitcoin as collateral. And I think the difference here is that we're posting the collateral as our lender to demonstrate to people you can borrow from us. And we're going to team up with banks that we say to them, we have the collateral, lend us the money backed by our Bitcoin so we can make loans to other companies in fiat or Bitcoin. So if you think about a Silvergate or a Signature Bank, what I think you'll see us doing is saying, hey, we got 100 million worth of Bitcoin and we're going to make offerings against that Bitcoin, but still stay long the Bitcoin, right? So the Bitcoin collateral is in our account, and therefore our shareholders benefit from being long Bitcoin while we make loans in the traditional world. And I think that more and more you're going to see Bitcoin become a marketplace for lending. I know that exists now, but it's in a very small scale. And denominated in a way that if you have to pay it back in Bitcoin, if you borrowed money at Bitcoin at 40,000 and Bitcoin were to rally to 100,000, it's a lot more expensive to buy back that Bitcoin to pay it back. So you're gonna have this big arbitrage there for a long time.
No, I mean, what you're saying is music to my ears, and this is why I was genuinely curious. I appreciate the clarifying point there. A couple of people in our audience are actually asking if you can share a little bit more details about this conference, where it is, and maybe where they can find a ticket.
You can go to riskonevents.com, riskonevents.com, and it's the conference starts. There's a party May 12th, and the conference is 13th and 14th, and then there's a breakfast on the 15th. The real meat of Bitcoin Day is Saturday, and the prior day, Damon John's going to be there, a bunch of entrepreneurs, sort of real estate stuff. We're trying to look through everything we do with a lens of how can Bitcoin be used, and that's conceptually not easy, right? Because you have to explain to people. Like a lot of times they say, well, why wouldn't you just use fiat? And I say to them, well, if you think about things becoming more expensive, every 14 years or so, the price of pretty much everything doubles, right? For some reason, the price of a hot dog at Costco doesn't double, but the price of everything else doubles, right? And if you try to double your money every 10 years, right? And the price of things double every 14 years, and you really want to do well. So the reason I say this is because right now there's a conversation about the decoupling of Bitcoin and how it's really a risk on asset, right? But my argument would be to look at it like Greg talks about it on a linear scale, right? Look at it over a logarithmic scale over time. And over time, it's over the last 12 years, it's been an incredible hedge against inflation. And I would encourage people to not pay attention to the market noise, the CNBC, look what Bitcoin's doing in the last 6 weeks, but say to yourself, really, there's an interview with Greg. I do a show called Bitcoin Weekly, which is not as popular as your show and not as good, and the people on it, I'm not as smart as you guys. But one of the things that Greg talks about is just think about how big Bitcoin can be in terms of an asset class. And if you thought about like all the total investment in the United States, I think it's like he talked about $950 trillion. The question is how much of an asset class does Bitcoin become? And this is where he comes up with this thesis of $2 million of Bitcoin, right? Because he thinks it'll be a $45 billion asset class. And if you really think about that, that's trivial relatively to the big scheme of how big Bitcoin could be. With 45 million millionaires around the world, it's not even one Bitcoin a person. It's really there's an opportunity here for that asset class to become more dominant part of the conversation. I don't know that it's going to be what everyone wants, which is this sort of this larger part of the asset class, but there is going to be ways to use Bitcoin, like he talked about earlier with Michael Saylor, in all kinds of different scenarios to where you're going to want to have it. You're going to want to have some of it. You're going to want to have something working for you that is not sort of traditional in the way that you're tied to all these other fiat denominated process. And so I've really bought into that idea of trying to get everyone together to talk about their different ideas. Because sometimes you go to a seminar, you go to a conference, and you feel like, well, I went there and it was fun, but I don't know if I really learned anything different than I already know. I networked. But in the Bitcoin world, this is why I watch your program, because I pay attention to every tweet you guys put out. Believe it or not, every single tweet Bitcoin Magazine puts out, I read every single one of them. And the reason why is because there's these, it's like a melting pot of new ideas and new concepts around how this sort of non-corruptible asset can be used. And therefore, I think you have to get your arms around continually learning about it and learning new things about it, because you don't know how it's going to affect you. When you think about Saylor, the blockchain is already being used in the pharmaceutical business, but there's a safety net here around Bitcoin that we haven't even thought of yet.
Well, I think you brought it up earlier, just the fact that it's a public and open ledger, the fact that everything can be out there and everyone can see. You may not necessarily know that this is my wallet address, but you can see the transactions happening there. whatever the pharmaceutical industry is doing is behind so many different closed doors and bureaucratic hurdles that like we'll never actually know what they're actually presenting to us is just data that's sort of siloed off to look a certain way.
Yeah, and you also, if you're a student of history and you think about how long the US has been around and how long we've been taking fiat currency, you'd be a lot more fearful if you understood that there have been times in the US's existence where only one guy, JP Morgan, saved the economy, right? Where he bought more gold. This has been there have been moments of time of the system being fragile for long periods of time, right? And there's also, to me, the most scary thing is this idea that the government can control your money. I think that use case obviously scares the government, it scares politicians, but it does empower the average person. I mean, that to me, that's really the trick, is that how long and how many corrupted things that will politicians do to make it so that eventually an entire generation, like your generation and younger, already know that Bitcoin is safe and secure with them. I mean, I can't even give my kids cash. My 16-year-olds, I have twin boy girl, they don't even know what to do with the cash. If I gave them $100, they'd say, "Can you Venmo me? Can you?" They don't want the cash, right? So I think that this is. You guys know Alex Svetsky? Have you ever listened to him at all?
Oh, we've had him on the show multiple times.
Yeah,
good friend.
He is really hardcore, and he said something that effectively Bitcoin was an immaculate conception. It only happened one time. You can't really make it happen again. And so I just think it's a matter of time that there's global adoption of Bitcoin. That at the end of the day, you're going to see corrupt practices even by other coins in which you don't really know how many people have and can they still make them, and it's sort of like where the number of them expand because of some reason, whatever they were. Like, I actually think this whole proof of stake thing with Ethereum, the second I heard they were going to change their concept, and I don't know if this is still going to happen, I pay no attention to it. The second I heard that they are going to change the way they do it and they're not going to mine, I thought to myself, that's exactly living proof as to why I don't want to be part of it. Now, I can understand the use case for it, NFTs and smart contracts, but I'm actually all for layer 3 and hoping that Bitcoin develops their own contracts. That's better development. I know that there's all kinds of issues with speed and what the development community thinks they should do, but the second you can make more of it and do whatever you want with it, and it's effectively a committee, I kind of think that power corrupts eventually, right? So if you have the power to change something, Bitcoin is constant, and you think about like a parent that you can rely on. You want something you can rely on over time that keeps their word, and Bitcoin can keep their word. Bitcoin keeps its word. It doesn't change because you're black or white or because you're rich or poor. It doesn't do anything different. It's just there.
Chris, you're going to have to correct me because I always say this wrong. Todd, I want to present to you, like, one of our colleagues at Bitcoin Magazine, Pete Rizzo, wrote an excellent piece for Forbes, essentially classifying Bitcoin holders into two different groups: the asset maximalists, which view Bitcoin as a new monetary maximalist. Thank you. See, I told you guys I was going to mess this up. Monetary maximalists who view this as like the purest form of money and treat it like an asset class, versus the platform maximalists who view the technology and the underlying technology of Bitcoin as what it's really offering the world, and changes to that platform are necessary as use cases expand. Of these sort of two groups, where do you sort of see yourself sitting more?
I think another way to think about it is, do you think Bitcoin needs to change to achieve global adoption, or do you think it can sort of ossify and it's already, close to perfect and we just need to maintain it?
Other than the speed of transfer, I've seen some, where they're transferring live from one place to another part of the world. Other than the speed of transfer, I mean, you probably always have to iterate a little bit, as long as the the basics of the 21 million coin and the basics of the network security are there. I think change makes sense, but from from being able to use it in more global ways and making it easier to use effectively. But I actually find it pretty easy to use now. So I guess that's a really good question. I haven't really thought of it the way you guys are asking.
We will definitely be sending you the article so you can take a look. It's worth the time.
I would tell you that, yeah, you know, Greg, not everyone works on Wall Street and understands what a credit default swap is. But Greg talks about Bitcoin being the ultimate credit default swap on fiat currency. And a guy who's done this for 33 years, it became very clear to me that Greg is right. And that is Bitcoin itself, putting all of it aside for everyone in the world, is a credit default swap on the fiat currency that they use in their own existing country, right? And therefore, it is a pure asset to offset what they're doing in fiat. And you know, in my lifetime, I was born in 1969. I remember pumping gas for my mom at 33 cents a gallon. If you just live that, I think I was 16 years old, and I said to myself, "Wow, if I can make $2,000 a month, I can have a car payment, I can rent an apartment, and I can be on my own." And if you just follow what fiat's done the last 100 years, and then you look at the potential for Bitcoin, I guess monetarily, I see it as a credit default swap like Greg does. The use cases for it, I don't know that I have to pick one or the other. I'm trying to think about you guys' question. I definitely want to read this article because I think there's a case for both, as long as it doesn't disrupt the purity of the way Bitcoin, like I am not for Bitcoin being mined a different way. I'm not for Bitcoin being the network changing. I mean, I guess for security purposes, if there was sort of supercomputers in the future, maybe there's a reason to upgrade the network. But yeah, that's over my pay scale.
Fair enough. I do want to now. Oh, Alex, go ahead, please.
Yeah, on that note, I just wanted to ask maybe what your definition was, the difference between Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies. Like, what makes it stand out to you? How do you differentiate, and how do you treat the other cryptocurrencies that are kind of, in some people's mind, competing with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I just don't think the other coins compete with them. I don't think that you can. Yeah, I don't think you can start something and say, I'm going to make a better Bitcoin, right? I think, as Alex Svetsky talked about, it's the immaculate conception of Bitcoin, how it was created, the time it was created, the use case that it was created for, the purity of it. And then what you see after that is people effectively saying, I can make a better Bitcoin for a profit. Now, maybe there's someone out there that's altruistic and is not really trying to make a profit from it. But I guess no one's saying it's not possible, but you can't create the level of adoption you have with Bitcoin and all the stories that have taken place with it over time. You can't recreate that. There's only one Bitcoin. I mean, there's only one Virgin Mary. There's only one Bitcoin. There's only one. I mean, I would pretty much argue there's only one Google. I mean, granted, there was Yahoo, but it wasn't the same thing, right? It wasn't the same concept. So I'm not saying there's not use cases for. I've been hearing about Avalanche. People like, you know, some of the technology there. I'm not saying there's not use cases for the technology, the speed of transfer, etc. But I've done it long enough to know that there was only one Exxon, there was only one Google, there was only one Microsoft. And you can't really put that genie back in the bottle of it being created. I mean, if you think about anything newly created now, is it fully decentralized? Is there no one in charge of it? Because if there's any human being in charge of it, if anyone has any say so, that's not already laid out, they're corruptible. And so I guess I could see a use case for something that maybe somehow was better technology, but not led by one person. I mean, in its purest form, being decentralized, where there's no one that can make choices. I don't know. I think that's uncorruptible.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that that is the distinction from a decentralization as viewpoint. Like that's what classifies all the other cryptocurrencies as securities. They're legally or otherwise, in my mind, they're all centralized securities, and Bitcoin is sovereign property.
Yeah, I think that when you think about it being sovereign property, where it's not nobody, you own a Bitcoin, but you don't own Bitcoin. You can't. I mean, I know they talk about this 51% attack, but I just don't see that as a scenario that ultimately the global community doesn't own all that Bitcoin, right? It's gotten too big, too fast, and I think what you probably not too fast, by the way, it's gotten too big, and it will eventually, especially what you're going to see, in my opinion, is when Bitcoin does rally to over 100,000. You will see more mass adoption and a lack of understanding of what it is. And that's, I guess, the most important thing is that people get educated, maybe whether it's Michael Saylor's hope.com or something where we can encourage people, or Bitcoin Magazine. I mean, hopefully, I see you guys have like 100,000 followers on YouTube. I know you have more on other things, but hopefully there's platforms out there like you guys have that will continue to educate people and make it more and more popular. Because as much as popular it is now, it's really not as popular as it could be, not even close, right? I think I read a couple months ago that if you own 0.28% of a Bitcoin, so you're about in the top 1%, which makes no sense to me, but I don't know that to be absolutely factual, but it does seem like you don't even have to have a Bitcoin to be in the top 1%.
I've never been in the top 1% of anything in my life. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm not even going to fact check that. I'm just going to accept it.
You're definitely top 1% Bitcoin hosts, Q. So
very small sample pool.
We're so into educating people on Bitcoin that at the conference, when you come to the conference, we give everyone $100 worth of Bitcoin on our Earnity platform. And then we run a full-time BitNile car at the Indy Racing Series with Connor Daly, who's on our platform too. And then at the Indy 500, we'll run the BitNile car, and we'll be running the Bitcoin racing team, which we have secured with Ed Carpenter. So we're going to be educating people pretty hard on Bitcoin. So there's a pretty big global community around IndyCar. It's one of the number one attended events in the world in terms of live events, with about 400,000 people there and about 5 million people watch it live on TV, but in person, about 400,000 people at the Indy 500. And we're pretty committed to starting to educate people on Earnity and how simple it is to use it and how people can adopt it. But with volatility is going to bring a lot of people pouring in and pouring out of it. So hopefully people like Greg and yourselves can get people to understand that it should be a percentage of their net worth. At least that's where I'm at.
I love that. And that's all we try to do. We're trying to help everyone out there watching and listening, just learn a little bit more about Bitcoin. None of us will ever say or claim that we're experts. We're all learning in real time and sharing with you guys what we're learning. Todd, one of the things before I am going to switch this conversation at a point to mining, but not quite yet. One of the other things you brought up in the article was you noticed a lot of similarities around the broader crypto market and a lot of what you saw during the dotcom bubble. Can you maybe touch on what you are witnessing be recreated? I will admit I was a little too young to be watching the stock market during that time.
So during the dotcom bubble, you eventually could just say, I added a .com. I remember, I'll never forget this. Books A Million became booksamillion.com, and Bluefly became bluefly.com. All you had to do was launch a .com, and these stocks went from $10 to 200 to from $5 to 150. And it was this euphoria of like, how many eyeballs there'll be, and there were .com everything, and you just announced that you had a .com business, and you traded like crazy, insane. I would say it was some kindred to the meme thing, you know, with GameStop. It was insanity. I mean, I was in stocks that I bought ePay on a Friday at $9, and it opened at 109 on Monday. I watched Amazon.com go up in a year and a half period, like pretty much every single day. You know, it was crazy, right? And then ultimately there was a bust when people realized you were still going to have to get adoption. So stay with me for a second, right? There used to be a period of time where no one would put their credit card on the internet. The idea, I even did it myself. I got pitched an idea called MrMunchie.com, which ultimately I think is DoorDash. And Mr. Munchie, this was years and years ago in the early days of the internet. And I just said, hey, I can just pick up the phone and call Pizza Hut. Why would I want to use it over the internet? Back then it was dial-up AOL and took 5 minutes to get online. But the adoption of new technology creates an imitator, and imitators get popular. But if they can't build out a network, they eventually collapse, right? They become not worth anything. And so you see that over time. And when I look at .com and I look at all the different cryptos, there's one Bitcoin, and maybe there's Ethereum, and there's a few others, but everything else is nonsense. It's a me too. I got something better. I'll throw money at it. Silicon Valley, I can create something better. I can iterate. But this is see, if you pay attention really closely to what Warren Buffett says about it ending badly, he's not necessarily talking about Bitcoin as he is the environment of cryptocurrencies ending badly, because there's not really a use case for unlimited amounts of, you know, I create my own cryptocurrency. I print a certain amount for myself. You can see that, by the way, with XRP. I don't know it well enough, so we'll be clear with XRP. But they had a certain amount that they could sell into the marketplace. And so I think Chris earlier said it was effectively a security. And I'm not opining on that at all. I don't know whether it was or it wasn't. But when you can sell into the marketplace, you make it corruptible, right? So all those other cryptos probably have a base amount of crypto themselves held by their institution or their foundation that can sell more crypto. And it's not super transparent. Like, I run a public company, we're raising a lot of money, prices down, but people know what we're selling. They know that we're out there actively raising capital over time. Not right now, but you know, in any given day, could be right now. I don't know. I don't pay attention to it every day, but you know, we have active ways of raising capital, but there's disclosure documents about that. And you can read it with the SEC filings. With all these cryptocurrencies, you really can't understand what's taking place. You don't really know. It's not transparent. And this is why I go back to and say that in the .com world, you could just say, I own a .com now. The stocks went parabolic, but they didn't survive. The vast majority of them didn't work out. And you see that in Amazon having about 50% of the retail market, right? Because the big ones survive, the ones that are the purest survive, the ones that have the best intent survive, and the ones that don't just don't. And so I suspect that there's going to be a scenario where there's going to be tons of cryptocurrency that doesn't survive. I mean, like, how much Dogecoin is there? I mean, I don't know what Elon. Listen, I'm not going to question him. He's a smart guy, much smarter than me, and he talks about Dogecoin being the purest way of transferring fast. But there's unlimited amounts of it. So I wouldn't think of scarcity. I wouldn't think of a store of value. I mean, does he want it to replace the dollar? See, that's where I just disagree. The U.S. government you kind of already have a digital dollar. You can just transfer it on your phone. I mean, I don't know really if you can make more of it, it's not Bitcoin.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's the quote, guys. If you can make more of it, it's not Bitcoin.
Right. I'm sure someone else has said that.
We're attributing the quote to you for today, at least, Todd.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I do want to now touch on like the mining efforts that you and your company have been building out. You touched on the fact that you guys are using nuclear energy. You're exploring other avenues as well. I've been very vocal that, the next iterations, both of clean energy capture, as well as sort of sending the energy out efficiently, are going to just come out of this mining space. What are you seeing as far as these sort of energy processes, and what are you impressed by, and what are you sort of turned off by?
Well, it is an expensive proposition. We have invested, I think, somewhere north of 160 million, $170 million. And imagine we went to Dubai, we already had 1,000 miners, and we bought 19,600 more. And we wrote checks for nearly 100 million Bitcoin, $100 million before we got really the next couple main shipments. And right now, we have paid for the vast majority of our miners and only have received about 34% of them. So you have a really heavy upfront capital cost. When you get, the reason why I can tell you there's a lot of value in the network is because if you are in Bitcoin mining, you are expending real energy, time, and money to mint those Bitcoin. They are very valuable. There's so few of them left, about less than 2 million now. And you'll be mining till 2140, but mathematically, they're really hard to get and they cost a lot of money to get. For us owning our own data center, it's pretty profitable from a margin perspective, but the upfront, the barriers to entry to mine Bitcoin are stratospheric. You just, the cost of a miner, the cost of maintaining them, as a public company, the cost of SOX compliance, making sure that your Bitcoin doesn't get stolen, that you track it, you audit it, it's astronomical in terms of upfront cost. But I see it as a incredibly lucrative, necessary commitment to the future of Bitcoin. And I see the validation of the network and that everyone's validating it, sort of every 10 minutes, and all the conceptual technology behind the timing of it and the reward process is, it's the purest form of, as he said, sovereignty, in terms of everyone contributing to the network over time and expending that energy. And no one says it better to me than Michael Saylor. No one expresses that you send energy over 500 miles, you lose 6%. You store energy every month, you lose 2%. And in Bitcoin, you lose no energy. You don't lose it if you store it. You don't lose it if you use it. You don't lose it if you transfer. You can keep it. You don't have to maintain it. I just bought a house with my son, and we bought a house, but in order to maintain it, you got to paint it, keep it, upkeep it, pay for taxes. That the asset isn't pure. The asset it costs money to have the asset. With Bitcoin, it doesn't cost money to have the asset. It doesn't cost. You can even argue that if you store your actual gold bar in your home, you risk the asset being stolen. I don't think you have the same risk as Bitcoin being stolen unless you give people access to your password. I mean, there's risk around the password part of it. I admit that part. But even gold takes up a physical space, right? And when you want to sell it, there's a big spread for what you get paid for it. There's not the market that you have today where I can just go digitally sell it really, really quickly. And so therefore, the mining part of it is an extension of energy, and it keeps it pure, validated, and access is not easy. Purchasing it is easy. Using it is easy, but making the Bitcoin isn't. Whereas going back to that conversation earlier about dotcom, is that you could just print more and decide to print more. With Bitcoin, you got to go get it. It's not easy to get. And one of the key differences is, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, is, if the price of gold doubles to $4,000, there'll be more gold mining. If the price goes of Bitcoin to 200,000, there's still only going to be a certain number of Bitcoin. There's nothing you can do about it. which is why it's so valuable. I mean, it's just why I don't know anything as pure as Bitcoin. And I've had to talk myself into that process over like a 6 or 7 year period to understand how pure it became and how like the original concept of it. Have you guys ever interviewed Dr. Frank Albo?
No.
I would encourage you to do it. He was actually hired to write a hit piece on Satoshi, the creator of Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin. He was he did a lot of research, smart guy out of Toronto, professor, PhD, and he actually did so much research that, and he, by the way, I work with him. He's a consultant for our company. He did so much research that he became convinced that not only is it not a scam, but it's the purest asset ever invented in the whole world, ever created. And now he's an advocate for it in some biblical way. And he's a great interview. And he's going to be at the conference. And Dr. Frank Albo is, I just think he's an eclectic thinker about Bitcoin. Being hired to write a hit piece and ultimately deciding that he should write about how wonderful Bitcoin is. I mean, that's really, to me, like, and he's as smart as they come. So
I will definitely be hounding one of the members of your team for an introduction. Thank you for that little tip off.
for sure.
Todd, I'm a little curious, and I always love asking people who operate big mining operations. You talked a little bit about how the margins right now are great. You know, the price of Bitcoin and what the block reward is are very lucrative for miners. I, however, keep an eye on sort of the happenings as well as just the way Bitcoin's price goes. Right now, based on a 6.25 block reward, is there a low threshold where the margin becomes a little bit more dangerous that your team strategy shifts around? Obviously, fully understanding that you may not be able to give us a specific number there.
Well, if you're asking what are our margins on Bitcoin, they can be as high as something like around 80%, pretty high. Yeah, wow. We're mining very competitively. We've actually published this, so it's not the margins. I think are as low as 67, depending on difficulty and where our forecast. But I think we run around 80% margins. That can change, obviously. Difficulty can go up, the price can go down. But I choose to believe with the halving and the global demand for Bitcoin that you're going to have a higher price. That you're ultimately, the algorithm sets the price higher over time because demand will be there. And I don't think there's any other provable point than what it costs. We're building an apartment building in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we bought the property in December. We had a budget of 120 million. And with the increase in cost, that budget is approaching 150 million now. So now you probably say, well, how can you afford to spend more money on products, services, and equipment, all the stuff you need, the resources you need to build a building? Rents are higher, right? Rents are a lot higher. And it will be a natural occurrence that as you see an inflated US dollar, you're going to see a move in Bitcoin that could be exponential, right? I think the next move in Bitcoin is to like goes through 69,000 and you wake up one day and Bitcoin's over 100 and people are just like, they won't be able to like, they'll be falling on themselves for it. And then that, that halving, which is coming, it will only make sense over time. That the commodity, the cost of Bitcoin, it really can't stay where it is. And that'll happen more and more. It'll become more dominant as other cryptos fail. Other small ones go by the wayside. As people quoting Alex Svetsky, the shit coins go away and everyone's only in Bitcoin. So anyways, Alex was very direct. He's going to be on my podcast, I think, in a couple of days. He was very direct on that show. I was very, he doesn't hold back. He doesn't hold back.
He has a tongue on him, to say the least. Uh,
Exactly.
I'm curious, how much of the China mining ban opened the doors for, in your opinion, the doors for American mining operations to really expand and become what they have become over the course of the last almost 2 years now? We're coming up on 2 years since China banned mining Bitcoin.
Well, I think in the beginning they said, "Oh, China banned Bitcoin 6 or 7 other times," but when we found out they were serious, I think it was 80% of the reason why, maybe even more, why the door opened. Other political instability, but the Chinese effectively pushed Bitmain and other miners to come here. I mean, just to be clear, we bought miners from people who had contracts that were going to take delivery in China that couldn't, and we bought their miners because they had no place to put them. And for us, it has effectively paved the way for us to be here. The Chinese did the U.S. a huge favor, and they should extend the favor of the U.S. by buying Bitcoin and putting on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. They should buy $1 trillion or half a trillion, sorry, not a trillion, $500 billion worth of Bitcoin. Buy it over time. Start putting on your balance sheet, and you'll see the asset class grow, and the U.S. will continue to be a dominant player there. That's my opinion. I don't know why the U.S. wouldn't want. They're the dominant reserve world currency, right? The petrodollar, dollars backed by bullets. You got to pay for everything in oil, and why would they not want to have a large portion on their balance sheet of the dominant digital reserve currency, which will be Bitcoin?
Music to my ears.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if they don't do it, they will not be participating in something that will be the digital reserve. In fact, believe me, I don't want the U.S. to do anything to mess around with Bitcoin. But the more people argue, the more governments argue that you shouldn't have it, the more it's going to become dominant. The more the public is smarter than they used to be. You got to remember, I don't know how old you are, but there was a time where social media didn't exist and you didn't have the plethora of news. From the start to the finish of something, it is like around the world in 15 minutes, right? And the public is becoming more educated, and there's more pronounced voices when any government tries to take away something from someone. I mean, you're seeing that kind of living proof with what's happening in Ukraine. The Russians thought they would walk into the Ukraine. What they walked into was a buzzsaw of drone attacks and technology that could be operated from a phone, and Elon Musk sending over Starlink. The control of everybody is being fought back by something like Bitcoin. And that the more and more people, they use Bitcoin to help people in Ukraine, the more and more it's used in a way. By the way, we had a political narrative, didn't we? The Russians are transferring their Bitcoin. The oligarchs are hiding their bit. That's just not true. That's just nonsense. Then maybe there was some selling, but who cares? It's it's nonsense.
I'm curious your thoughts. We touched on this at the very beginning of the show. Just, the hacks did not actually happen on the Bitcoin network itself. It was happening at these exchanges and on these sort of centralized points where an attack vector can come in and hack someone through this exchange. We saw conversations happening over in Canada and even over in Russia and Ukraine, where legislators were calling upon exchanges to shut down access to citizens. We've seen some exchanges and some companies follow suit, and others have been very vocal and saying that is antithetical to what Bitcoin is and does. Yes, you open the door for anyone to access the network, but my belief is that's the point. I love your thoughts on this idea that U.S. legislators are coming down on U.S.-based companies to potentially shut down access in these foreign nations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. The government has used 9/11, what happened in 2001, and the Patriot Act, and they've weaponized everything to be money laundering, everything to be KYC, everything to be illegal. Everyone's a money launderer. It's really. I'll give you case in point. We, as a company, have had multiple bank accounts shut down at Wells Fargo, at US Bank. I can name institutions that saw that we were in Bitcoin mining and basically closed our accounts, right? Now they're allowed to do that. They can do business. There are private companies, even public companies, but they're a private company in the sense they're not owned by the government. They can decide who they want to do business with. Sometimes we allow people say they burn flags and they have free speech and they can say things that we don't like as a government. But when the government tries to shut them down and stop them for the greater good, it's very dangerous to be able to say, we're not going to let people transact unless we let them transact the way we want. And so, you know, it's somewhat like the gun laws in this country too. And that is, for the freedom of having a gun in Nevada, there are occasionally people that use them in a poor way. And to control the few, you should not limit the many. And so any politician, anybody who has any vested interest in controlling the outcome, like I'm in charge now, so I'm gonna not let my opponents use Bitcoin the way, because my political party doesn't use Bitcoin the same way you guys use it. It's really hard to say, but in its purest form, I think that you can go get a court order, you can go try someone, you can get injunctive relief very quickly to stop someone from moving their Bitcoin. The government should be forced to do that kind of thing and not just say, we can stop you from doing things whenever we want. So it's got to go through a judicial process still. And even if that means people slip away, they slip away. It's not a perfect scenario. There are companies out there that can track wallets and where money goes, and ultimately you can track that. So I think for the sake of freedom, you unfortunately have to limit the government's role in power corrupts, right? You've seen this in Canada where they didn't like certain things, so they shut your bank account down or they froze your bank account down. That's only more of a use case for Bitcoin. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I really appreciated that perspective too, because I mean, you're absolutely right. It seems like there was definitely a period of time where everything just fell under the umbrella of, well, the Patriot Act lets us do this. And it seems like we figured out ways to extrapolate that into our global business, where in all honesty, sometimes we have no business being involved or having a say in what's going on. I'm curious your thoughts also, going back to the China of it all. We're seeing a lot of issues with supply chain, and that's been a big issue now coming up on a year. It was brought up that, you know, all the miners in general are hoping to reach over 300 megahertz for the total hash rate by the end of this year. There's still some constraints and now some questions around, will miners actually receive these new miners in time? Are you guys feeling these constraints at all? Are you guys seeing supply chain issues as far as any hardware getting sent over to you?
We've been having pretty big supply chain issues on transformers, on copper cable, wiring harnesses, stuff like that. But Bitmain has been able to deliver the miners to us on time. We have been getting them on a regular basis. They ship them to us from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. They don't ship them from China for sure. No question about that. We haven't seen issues with them. They've been delivering, but keep in mind, we only ordered 20,600 of them. Right now we get about 2,300 S19 J Pros a month now. We'll get that for the next 6 months or so. And then starting, I believe in July or August, we'll get the S19 XPs, the 140 terahash, and we'll have completed our install by October of all 20,600 miners, about 2.4 exahash. In theory, if we were to get them done right now by October, we could be 1% of the global hash rate. I don't know if we will be or not, because it depends. There are people fooling around with a little bit. You can see during the summertime, some people shutting down in Texas, and I don't know what's happening in Kazakhstan. But we haven't had trouble getting delivery yet, and hopefully we don't. But I do think that you have trouble. There was a time where there was a lot of trouble with concern that you get chipsets, and that they'd be able to deliver. And I don't know that that's not still an issue. But when we bought the first 1,000 miners when Bitcoin was probably 32,000. We still had the S19 or S9 still running from 5 years ago. Believe it or not, people still run them. We just sold a bunch of them. I think 1,700 of them or something to a group that's probably running them for dirt cheap, making $1 a day or something. I don't know. I don't know what they'd be doing with them. Maybe immersing them or something like that. We haven't really had an issue other than hardware. We've had an issue with copper cables and transformers. Transformers have been really difficult to get. That's probably been our biggest delay.
Got it. Todd, I'm realizing we're a little over time, and I don't want to keep stealing you. Where can our audience learn more about you, stay up to date? I know you mentioned you have a podcast and the conference coming up in Vegas, and that's going to be May 12th through the 14th for anyone else who's going to try to go.
They can find me on Instagram. It's Todd Ault, TODDAULT. They can find me on Twitter, Todd Ault with 3 big I's, because I'm the third, Todd Ault the third. Those accounts are verified. My Twitter and my Instagram are verified with the blue check. And then obviously bitnile.com is available. Risk on events. You just put in my name, you'll pretty much figure me out there. We're pretty active out there in social and stuff like that. But awesome. I appreciate being on your show, Chris. Thank you so much too, everybody. I follow you guys a lot, so hopefully you guys continue to grow.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Todd. We will be sure to continue this conversation soon enough, man.
Appreciate it.
Everyone else, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be joined by CK Snark and Ansel for a new episode of FedWatch. So stick around, guys, and get those likes up. Once we hit 150, we'll drop another Sats code for some free Bitcoin.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Love it. So you guys got Twitter?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is up, guys? We are going to be joined shortly by CK, and I have Ansel here. I'm hijacking FedWatch for a second to remind all of you guys who are watching, tickets for Bitcoin 2023 are on sale now. I know they were crazy expensive, especially over the course of the last 3-4 months leading up to the conference. Well, right now, tickets are cheaper than they've ever been, and they will only go up in price from here. Use promo code FOMO and get 10% off. Join us. I cannot say where it's going to be yet. It's TBD. I can confirm it will be in the United States if that is helpful for anyone else. But, if I get my way, it'll be somewhere sunny and warm. If Alex gets his way, it'll be somewhere sunny and warm. And if David Bailey gets his way, it'll be somewhere sunny and warm. So that'll be the only hint I give you. And also, I believe at the end of this week or maybe at the end of next week, all of our conference swag that like I'm wearing our Sound Money Fest t-shirt. Alex is wearing the B22 hoodie. The 22 hoodie is not for sale. Unfortunately, I realized that. One lucky viewer did receive it. It is in the mail for you right now. And then Chris, our producer, is rocking the Sound Money Fest windbreaker. That is honestly my favorite piece of swag. Yeah, like it just feel free to. Oh, Alex is taking his shirt off, guys.
Swag on swag, Sound Money Fest. Gotta rep
This is
it.
only going to be available for a limited time. Use code FOMO for that as well and get 10% off there.
Don't forget to pick up your Moon Mag at that store, guys. Get a subscription. This is a beautiful design work by shout out Annabelle from our team. It's a great little Bitcoin treasure, and collect them. Get two, get one, and seal it up. This one's worth $1,000. So just hodl your Bitcoin magazines.
Look at that, guys. We're helping you guys invest in Bitcoin, invest in clothes, invest in paper, magazines. You can do it all. Heck, you see those shoes in Alex's background? You guys, if you're not following Alex on Instagram, you should, because he was posting like all of the shots of him like actually doing that. He did not make Nike shoes, no, but he took the Nike shoes and designed them, put on the Bitcoin logo on it. Honestly, it was so cool watching him rip that tape off. I think I've rewatched that clip probably like 20 times. Maybe was not as sober as I should have been, but it still looked awesome nonetheless.
Appreciate that. Be careful on Instagram, though. Not verified. Got a bunch of imposters for whatever weird reason. And they all have more followers than me.
Rule of thumb, if you find any of us on Instagram, our accounts are the ones with less followers than our fake account. CK has joined us, and I am going to be handing the mic over to him the moment he shows us his pretty face. He's still hiding the pretty face.
Yeah, let me say something then right before he jumps on. If you guys listen to FedWatch every week when we go live and you guys have questions, pop them in the chat and hopefully we can get to them and answer them like at the end of the show right before we sign off or something like that. What's up, CK? You're still muted.
Yeah, sorry
CK?
for being late here. But yeah, excited for this chat. We're going to jump into a lot of the craziness that's happened since we jumped on. I don't know who listened to Ansel's last FedWatch solo, but he hit on a lot of great information. And honestly, Ansel, I love that format. So I'm a big fan of Bitcoin and markets, and that was kind of your original format on that show. So hopefully we can keep that rolling. But a lot of good stuff to unpack here. We got a lot of great sound bites from different central bankers. We're not going to tease them out clip by clip, but really we're just going to kind of talk them through. And then hopefully we can add in some foreign clips to future streams that we do here on Bitcoin Magazine Live. Ansel, do you want to kind of jump into high level what you saw from this IMF debate, other than the fact that it performed less well than Bitcoin 22 content on Bitcoin Magazine? Really insane to see Bitcoin Magazine outperforming CNBC streams with central bankers from the major central banks and financial institutions and governing bodies. But I mean, I guess that's what the people want.
Yeah. So up front, that was my fault of getting the clips to you guys late, but hopefully in the future we'll get it down, and maybe I'll even do a supplementary episode and break it down by myself. Like CK was saying, he likes that format. So I might even do that this week. We'll see if we can get that out. But yeah, overall, this was a IMF meeting. And after the IMF meeting, they had a roundtable with, let's see who was all there. Of course, Jerome Powell and Christine Lagarde. Also managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgievna, I think you say her last name, the Indonesian finance minister, I won't even try to pronounce her name, and the Barbados prime minister, Mia Mottley. So they had it wasn't even a debate, they call it a debate, but it was just a roundtable where they kind of voiced their opinions and their concerns about the global economy right now. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, we kind of knew what Powell and Lagarde were going to say, but I thought one of the interesting members of this panel was the Indonesian finance minister, because she has an emerging market view and she was very well spoken. She broke it down, in a way that was pretty plain English for people, and I just really appreciate that perspective. But overall, it was an interesting back and forth, and we can break down some of the major points that we kind of both brought out of this.
No, 100%. I mean, it was very interesting, again, to kind of have these four people. I think in particular, the ones that we focused on were Jerome Powell, Christine Lagarde, and I'm blanking out on the name of the director of the IMF, Kristalina.
Yeah.
Kristalina. So they had some really interesting commentary regarding inflation, regarding the differences between the US economy, the European economy. Very interesting perspectives on Ukraine, Russia, what those activities had to do with them meeting their mandates, maybe casting off some blame there. But I mean, I don't know if you want to just kind of jump into the first clip that we kind of picked out here with Christine Lagarde, or how you wanted to kick this off.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of talk through what she said here. So she's the president of the ECB, and I have been pretty bearish on the euro and on the ECB for several years now. And she said that their main risk was towards higher inflation. If you had to pick whether they're going to overshoot above their target or below their target on inflation, she said the risk is to the upside. And then she said the risk to growth was on the downside. So they are in a very tough situation. They can't tighten because the risk is to the downside on growth. And they would go, it would put them directly into recession. Now, Powell kind of responded to that, and he said that the U.S. economy was much more robust, and so they had more room to be more hawkish, where Lagarde said that she had this owl pin on, and she's like, I'm not a hawk or a dove. I wear this owl pin. That's so European, that comment. But anyways, the one thing that I pulled out too was that she saluted the sanctions, and all along she's like blaming this and that for their problems, right? And she doesn't even want to, or she blames Russia, but she doesn't blame the reaction by the European Union on these sanctions and what the effect that has on the economy. Did you have any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, I took notes here on our doc as I was watching it, and I pulled out a lot of the same things. One is this kind of idea that Russia did something that is inexcusable, and therefore everything is kind of Russia's fault because they did this inexcusable, horrible thing. And I guess that is the narrative that all of these Western central bankers are taking. And it's kind of like this uniting force that's bringing them together, which is pretty interesting. But with that being said, I think there is something to be said about when it comes to like the diplomacy, at least when it comes to NATO, is almost in Europe is become like permissioned, right? And Russia was not getting anywhere there. I'm not trying to excuse what Russia is doing, but there's something to be said about the permissionlessness of war. If you need to, take over resources, if you need to make things happen, you don't have to ask for permission to put men into combat. So like, I just think that the framing of this is inexcusable. I just don't think it's honest. And I know that in past shows you've discussed about how NATO and the US have, pushed Russia in a difficult position because of, putting weapons in Ukraine, being involved in Ukraine, and having that as a strategic territory between Europe and Russia. I'm not a geopolitical expert or anything like that, but I do think that the framing that Lagarde, Jerome, a lot of these central bankers are using in regards to the dynamics of the conflict maybe aren't necessarily the most honest.
Yeah, and I try to stay away these days from being outspoken on the Russia situation, but I think it's very glaringly obvious that sanctions are also an act of war, right? Sanctions starve populations, and they hurt the economy. So there's millions of poor people in Europe that are getting completely wrecked. There's people on the edge of starvation, even in the socialist republics of Europe, that are hurt by these sanctions, right? And they don't have to do the sanctions. And I think that is, I mean, it's voluntary on both sides. The war is voluntary aggression by Russia, and the sanctions are voluntary aggression by the EU. But of course, they don't ever want to mention that. They say pretty much whatever, they can do whatever they want in response to this Russian aggression. And so anyway, I wanted to start building this narrative just from these first few comments and show that they don't have any problem with destroying demand within their selective economies. So Lagarde, she praises the sanctions, which destroys demand in the EU. And Powell, a little bit later, we'll probably cover this, that, you know, he talks about destroying demand in the US, and they have no problem with that.
Well, so what, and this is kind of jumping ahead, but what Powell is talking about, how the central bankers can't control the supply side aspect. And obviously other things that, impact that. That's supply chains, that's politics, that is foreign relations, that's war. That is what affects the supply side. But what they can control and manipulate is the demand side. And I think that is a very key theme that you're bringing up here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to that next one. We'll have to skip ahead quite a bit, because then they start talking about actually what makes up this inflation.
Let's not skip ahead. Let's not skip ahead. I do want to say on one more thing with Lagarde. It was really interesting that she noted, she was like, after she saluted the sanctions on Russia, obviously she believes are justified. We're not going to get into what's the deal there, but she did say that whatever is happening around the world because of Russia and Ukraine conflict, that is going to impact their plans, right? So she kind of alludes to we have a goal, we have a mandate, we have these plans, and our plans, our trajectory is being impacted by this conflict that is unforeseen, is outside of our control, which is very interesting framing as well.
Yeah, we've heard that over the years from Federal Reserve chairmen as well, where they want to blame the global economic situation for maybe some indecision on their part. And Lagarde does kind of sidestep multiple, they try to pin her down, like, when are you going to actually stop QE? And, she's like, oh, we have to see when it's going to be appropriate. So, they use these geopolitical situations to sidestep making a firm commitment, which is understandable. I mean, they are data dependent, and they said that on this roundtable here, that they are data dependent. And I always like to point out, if you're acting after the data comes in, that means you're a follower. You're not leading the market. You're not moving the market. You're actually following the market.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, markets are in control. It's just the central bankers are throwing wrenches into the system, right? I think that's the key of FedWatch, guys. This is our underlying message: is that the central bankers, they are not in control. They're a part of a bigger system, and all of their interventions, they have unknown effects. And they talk about it on this panel. They talk about how there's unintended effects of what they do. Sometimes they don't think about those unintended effects. They're just thinking about their specific objectives. And the reality is that I found it really weird watching them, these four people even they could have sounded intelligent and reasonable. And oftentimes they do out of context. But when you think of when you zoom out and you're like, wow, these people, no matter, are controlling massive institutions that have massive impacts on human suffering and human I guess human progress, right? Huge impacts on them, and we're letting old dinosaurs control that. And they don't have as much information as they need. They don't have more information than the market, and they have bad incentives. Some of these people, you can point to Lagarde. She is an accused criminal. She's a convicted criminal. So it's crazy to just watch a panel of four people that have all this power. And it really makes it feel like Bitcoin is the future, because Bitcoin it automates all of this. It takes it away from them and it gives it back to market forces. And it's a really much more pure way in order to have an economic system. I know we're kind of getting off the rails here, so I'm going to pass it back to you, Ansel.
I'll just say, I think that's just a feature of the market or reality, is that they are always behind a little bit, right? Like because I was trying to think, well, back in 1915, was the Fed, more up to speed with what was going on in the economy? And I don't think so back then either. They were always behind. The free market is always ahead with more information. And I mean, that's the basic argument why we want free markets versus planned economies, because the free market efficiently can allocate these resources without even thinking about it, right? And they make mistakes. So I totally agree with what you said there. Should we move on to Powell's next comment?
Let's do it.
Okay, so he said that, because they brought up the inflation question to him, and he's like, well, we're going to use our tools. This is a quote, we will use our tools to get demand and supply back in sync with their 2% goal. So how are they going to do that? That brings me back to they don't control the supply side of things, so they have to be drilling down on the demand side. If you have undersupply and you have a supply shock, what do you have to do to demand to get that back in line and get your inflation down?
You got to bring it down.
Yeah, you have to bring demand down. So that's what that's what came across of all of Powell's comments. They're targeting the demand side on purpose because that's all they can control. So what do you think about that idea?
I mean, it's obvious that that's what they're saying. It's just when you put it into layman's term, it's a lot more sinister. And again, they're calling it controlling, or they're managing, or bringing it back in sync. But what they're actually doing is they're manipulating. That's the key word here. They are manipulating behavior, or they're attempting to, at least. And Ansel, I'm sure you'll say, like, they're just managing expectations. This is expectation management, and that is what creates this kind of behavior. But regardless, that their intention is to manipulate, and I think that is one of the keys. And you're right. They say that they can't control demand. We know that they can't control demand, other than whatever they're doing on a political level to impact demand. But they can, theoretically, their tools should affect supply. Or sorry, they can't control supply. They can't. I'm completely blowing it, guys. They can't control supply, but their tools allow them theoretically to control demand, and that's what they're going to try to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, they can't control supply in one aspect. They can put sanctions on countries, right? So, like, they can seize the Russian central bank's assets, and that's going to put supply down, right? But they can't manipulate supply upwards.
Is that a central bank function, or is that more political?
The sanctioning? Well, it's depends, I guess, on the country you're in. Powell was very upset that they put the sanctions on the Russian central bank, because he was worried about what it would do to liquidity in the global financial system. As of now, it doesn't seem to have done much, because Russia's continued to be able to pay their bills and haven't been defaulted. I mean, Citigroup and some of these other banks in the US that were holding these millions and millions, hundreds of billions, I think, of dollars worth of Russia central bank's assets, they've been allowing them to use those assets to pay their debts, but they can't do anything else with them. So it really hasn't accomplished what they thought it was going to accomplish. But yeah, Powell was upset with that decision. At least central bankers will be consulted, I would believe, in all countries. But yes, I don't think that's a role of the central bank, more of a political role, obviously.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was kind of leaning on, is I feel like there's the politics, and that's, I think, when it comes to impacting supply, for the most part, it's political. When it comes to sanctions, war, that kind of thing.
Let me break in there real quick too. That's one reason why Raskin was not put on the board of governors, because she wanted to use monetary policy to direct capital away from fossil fuel companies. and that did not seem to be appropriate. So the Fed at least tries to be apolitical, but that's not guaranteed. I mean, Lagarde didn't sound like she was apolitical up there, did she?
I mean, none of them sounded like they were apolitical, and if anything, it sounded like at least they were united on the front against Russia. Again, I'm not trying to say a lot about how they should be, but where at one point during the COVID crisis, it seemed like there was a divide between the U.S. and then the rest of kind of like the Western central banking apparatus. Now, at least when it comes to working together to navigate the tidal wave that has been created by Russia and Ukraine, they're on the same boat, if you will.
Yeah, and they do talk about that a little bit there in the discussions. Very specifically, they talk about the rules that Lagarde says, all these economies have prospered under this rule. And when you join the international community, then you are kind of, it's an implied acknowledgement of this rule set. And so I think that's one of the things breaking down. People don't really care too much about what the IMF says anymore. They don't care what the UN says anymore. They're not seen as being legitimate international organizations from all economies around the world. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'll also say that Powell, literally said in here that the market is processing what they're saying. That's a direct quote. The market is processing what we're saying. And so, yeah, that's their whole monetary policy goal, is to talk and form expectations of the future.
He did also say that that multiple people on the committee think that it's appropriate to have multiple 50 basis point hikes, and that multiple 50 basis point hikes are on the table. So that is an expectation that it seems as though the US Fed is trying to push over the past few months, and it seems like they're going to continue to push that narrative and, I guess those consequent actions.
Yeah, funny tidbit was, did you hear the Indonesian finance minister a little bit later? And she said, well, Powell just told us that there's going to be a 50 basis point hike. And everyone's like, no, but he didn't say that. And she's like, oh, well, yeah, you know what I mean. So, yeah.
I didn't quite catch that, but honestly, it's like, hey, you're in a PR meeting about your company, you're talking about it to the rest of the world, and you just let something slip on accident like that. That's kind of happening left and right on these calls, and they're not 100% in sync. And like I said, I just see the boomer counter of the traditional financial system, and it's going to just get absolutely clobbered by the efficiency of an automated monetary system, which is Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Should we move on to where Lagarde talks about the makeup of CPI? Okay, so
let's do it.
She said that about 50% of their CPI rating, which is coming in at 7.4% in March, 50% of that is due to energy alone. And she said, if you take out energy and food, which are both highly dependent on supply chains, right? Especially for Europe, energy is much less dependent on, or energy prices are much less dependent on the international supply chains for the US. But for Europe, of course, all of their energy is coming from abroad pretty much. So if they strip out energy and food, their core inflation was only 2.9%. And so she reiterated about the supply shock. And that's when Powell got into, oh no, but our policies can't do anything about supply. So do you have any thoughts on the CPI discussion they had there?
Well, I mean, again, I think it gives you a glimpse into how they posture, but when you think about their quote unquote reasonable talking points, it really, when you think about it, it unravels, right? So first of all, she's saying, hey, let's just subtract food and energy because those are Russia's fault. So actually, we're not doing that bad of a job. We're looking at under 3% inflation on our core inflation, right? But the problem is that the food and the energy costs are going to impact everything else. One, so that she completely ignores that, and she tries to reframe it as a, oh, hey, that's Russia's fault, we can just subtract it. But two, it, like, you can tell that she's not being honest. Like, you can tell that she's trying to sell a rotten egg, right? She's saying, hey, like, things are bad, but it's not our fault, we're doing a good job. Like, the core CPI, that's what we're dealing with. She's not trying to educate people on the impacts of the complex global economy. And it makes you really question these people's intentions and the incentives that they're operating by, right? So, I mean, sure, hey, you can frame it however you want, Christine Lagarde, but you're a snake. You're trying to deceive the public on the reality, and ultimately, you are screwing up. You are blessing and saying good job on the sanctions that are causing these price hikes that are hurting the lowest people in your constituency. So, I mean, like, these are the people that we're fighting against. Like, this is what Bitcoin is here to eradicate.
Yeah, and a very important part of that is, we reached this fragile place where energy is 50% of their CPI because of their past decisions, right? Like, the way that the economy has evolved under ECB stewardship has put them in a place now that the CPI is rising. So any way you slice it, the ECB, at least their narrative, their push towards globalization and fragility of the credit system and all of that has put them in the place where they are today. But I have to point out as well that it's a hard job to measure inflation. And I mean, it should be easy, right? We should be able to say how much money was printed. That should be the inflation rate. But of course, we can't do that. So what they have to do is try to decide what percentage of consumer prices is made up of energy, and then how much are the sanctions or the supply chains affecting those prices changes. And it gets really, really overly complicated very, very quickly. And the reason why they can't just say, we printed this much money, that's the inflation rate, is because they don't really print money.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to get into the details here because people like agree, disagree, whatever. Ultimately, they're not in control. They create chaos. They're lying to your face. They're going to be automated away. Let's keep breaking down, this BS. Let's go to the next clip, right? So, I think, what is it? This next clip was regarding, the next clip here is specifically, targeted towards Powell, but talking about globalization and the impacts of globalization. I have to give a shout out to the moderator. She was asking good questions. She was framing things in order to try to get them to talk about things that are a little bit outside of their scope of control, that crisscrossed their jurisdiction. So shout out to the moderator, but she got them to start commentating on let's just say the reversal in globalization and the onshoring of a lot of production in these places that have gotten very used to, importing a lot of stuff from cheaper production hubs.
Yeah, and she first poses that question about globalization to Powell, and she said, she asked, do we see a reversal of globalization and a shrinking of the length of supply chains, and he's like, well, we could be seeing that. It's very possible that we see from this point forward a reversal in globalization. Of course, that was, like, to me, the way I kind of understand these different central bankers and their different constituents that they represent. That is not good to hear if you are Europe, right? Because Europe they rely on globalization for their consumers to buy their heavy machinery from Germany. They rely on Russia for their energy needs. And so when you tell them that globalization is going away, to me, if I were a European, I would be like, of course not. It's not going away. And that's actually what Lagarde said. Lagarde got to speak later, and she's like, oh no, we're just revisiting the terms of trade. Globalization is not going away. So there was definitely a disagreement there, right, between Powell's position on, yeah, we probably will see some sort of reversal in globalization, to Lagarde saying, oh no deglobalization in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Powell was definitely, kind of tiptoeing around the question. He said, we haven't reversed yet. We're just slowing down. We may see a reversal. But he did say there's costs and benefits, that globalization has a cost, and that there could be a different world with higher inflation, less productivity, but more security, more reliability of supply chains. Those words came out of his mouth. Like Ansel said, Lagarde, of course, played it down. And I think it's really important for listeners to understand, like, Europe is in a very specific situation that's very different than the US. It's very different from China. It's very different from India. And Europe needs globalization. Europe needs the current kind of order of things in order for it to be viable. So that needs to color how you're kind of analyzing what Lagarde is saying, analyzing Europe's kind of position between Russia, the US, and other world powers.
Yeah, that's one reason why the Europeans went out and were colonialists, right? They went out to colonize these places and create a complete self-sufficient economy, where the US doesn't necessarily have to do that. Europe has achieved that now. Instead of colonialization, they've achieved that through globalization. And the US doesn't really need to worry about that too much, because we have a relatively self-sufficient economy. And I would say maybe the Eastern Asian countries are relatively self-sufficient as well. So Europe is in a very unique position on the map, and that drives their need for globalization. Yeah, for sure. Another thing I thought was interesting was the Indonesian prime minister. She brought up a good point, and she said that there has been as an emerging market, head of an emerging market bank, she noticed that change from using the term efficiency to security, and that her idea of kind of the emerging market consensus, or the feeling out there in emerging markets, is that globalization is on a shaky ground. So to me, that says a lot more than what Lagarde says, or even what Powell says. Is this is straight from an emerging market central bank head, and she said that the emerging markets are feeling it.
I mean, again, it's the people who need the efficiency, who run the tightest margins, who make the least amount of money, who feel it the most. And that's the emerging markets. That's the poorest in developing markets. So it makes sense. And again, I can't help but just think of, like, Bitcoin is the ultimate solution to kind of fix a lot of these issues. I don't want to be too hyperbolic here, but again, like, for all of these issues, there's Bitcoin. It's just interesting to think about how, hey, the world is turning to security. The world is valuing reliability. Oh, guess what? We have the most reliable, most secure, most decentralized, most localized protocol for value ever. And it's, burgeoning here in the last 12 years, just in time, right? And of course, we talk about Satoshi Nakamoto's timing and the message in the Genesis block, Chancellor on the brink of the second bailout, and how a lot of what has gotten us to this point in the fiat system has colored why Bitcoin was created in the first place. But it just makes me bullish. I mean, Ansel, you've been following this space for a long time. Have you seen kind of the thesis that Bitcoin critics have against the traditional system just continue to play out? And how has it colored your kind of certainty or confidence in this new versioning system that is Bitcoin?
So you mean the narratives that we hear in the sound money space leveled against the status quo?
Yeah.
Well, Yeah, man, I've been following this since roughly the year 2000, maybe 1998, when I was a senior in high school. But I think it's played out to a degree, but it's a lot slower. And the reason why that is, I mean, stop me if you don't want me going down this road. But at first, I thought it was going to be this inflationary end, right? Because the gold bugs, the sound money folks, they said that we were printing a lot of money and there was going to be this inflationary end. But the reason why they've been able to kick the can so much is because it's actually a deflationary end. And all you need to do to stop a deflationary collapse is take out more debt. But you can't ever solve it. You just kick the can down the road and you lose a little bit of growth and you lose a little bit of productivity and you go on to the next crisis. So I think things are definitely playing out. But yeah, and since Bitcoin's been around, it's definitely sped up and it's definitely become more mainstream. Everybody knows about Bitcoin that you talk to out there. Everyone's heard the arguments of Bitcoin. And so it's definitely getting much more into the common man's knowledge set about what's going on. And remember that quote, was it from Henry Ford or one of the Rothschilds or whatever, that famous one about if the people knew how the money worked, there would be a riot tomorrow or something like that. So Henry Ford, yeah.
I think that's Henry Ford, yeah.
So it's getting more and more like that, right? We're approaching that singularity of where people understand how the system works, and there will be a force, a movement, a revolution towards a new type of money or a new type of system, and that will be Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I don't know how many of y'all have read The Mandibles, but it's a book that's kind of making its way through the Bitcoin sphere. And I don't want to, spoil too much of the book, but in the book, the average people that are like living through the time period that it's talking about, money is something that they're hyper aware of, and they are very aware of what's happening in the markets, and they're very aware of what it means to be a reserve currency of the world and what is the reserve currency of the world. And I think that that's something that Westerners don't experience, but maybe people, in the global South, people in third world countries, they know all too well what it feels like to not have a secure, sound, reliable monetary system, and having to think about what's happening globally a lot more in the grand scheme of just getting the goods, services, resources that you need. So I think, like you said, the awareness of the problem is growing, in the understanding, the arguments for why sound money are growing. And I'm excited for the singularity. I'm hopeful that the Bitcoin economy continues to grow as the awareness of the problem grows, and those two things speed up people realizing that, hey, the solution is here, it's Bitcoin, and we can just continue to use it and move off this broken system.
Excellent. Yeah, excellently said there. I think the way I tied Bitcoin into this IMF meeting is that what we saw there on the video, and of course we'll link to everything in the show notes for you guys, but the medium is the message a lot of times, right? And the medium here was smiling, laughing central bankers all getting along and agreeing and having a good old time. They have multiple people from the emerging markets, and everyone's getting along, and they all have the same goal moving forward. But that's most likely not the case, right? And so Bitcoin is there and we could tell that under the surface. We saw some of those disagreements with Powell and Lagarde on globalization. They acknowledged multiple times that they have different challenges because of their economies are fundamentally different, right? They said they had different underlying inflation. And so their economies are different. They have different problems. And you can feel there's disagreement there, even though the message they were trying to portray is one of unity. So Bitcoin is there for enemies, right? Bitcoin is there when that unity breaks down and when people don't agree. And there's warfare even out there. Heaven forbid there's warfare and sanctions. But Bitcoin is there for these times. It's there for the hard times.
100%. I mean, again, that's one of the benefits of like Bitcoin's permissionlessness, censorship, God, I can't speak right now. Censorship resistance, global nature, all of these things make Bitcoin that perfect subset to, bail people out of this chaos, and then again be that system that we build on. It's not just the life raft, but it's the life raft that is actually the foundation for the future as well. So I think it's really exciting. And again, for those who pay attention to what these central bankers are saying, like it should make you bullish. But also, like, you should be wary of what's going to happen, because they're definitely forecasting what they're going to try to make happen and what they're going to try to make the narrative be. So again, I don't know how effective that is. I'm not going to comment on what they can and can't do, but they're at least telling you what they're going to try to do.
Absolutely. And another place that you see some tension is in the recent, I believe it was a G7, but it might have been the G20 meeting. And, Russia is part of that. And as soon as the Russian representatives started speaking, Janet Yellen stood up and walked out. So there is a lot of animosity in some of these larger organizations. I mean, the way the UN has treated this Russian situation by out of the ordinary, they rejected a lot of calls for votes and representation from a Russian representative. And so they're losing, all of these international organizations are slowly losing credibility. And that's what Bitcoin does very well, because it doesn't need anyone's credibility. It is what it is. As long as there's 21 million, Bitcoin will keep functioning the way it does.
Well, I mean, and at the beginning, we talked about how this is kind of an idea that is pushed and framed by Jason Lowry, but war is permissionless, right? And I'm not trying to say we should use war, but that is a feature of war, is that it is permissionless. You don't have to ask for permission to wage war, especially if you are a national power. And then you look at diplomacy in the UN, international diplomacy in the UN, and different aspects of trying to, work with Europe, work with the West, work with other countries abroad. And sometimes you just can't get what you want. You can't reason with, and sometimes you get completely shut out of and disrespected in. And again, when you see how these central bankers talk about the situation, they do not take they don't take credit for or responsibility for what their side may have done to worsen the crisis. And until both sides can understand how they got there, it's very difficult to resolve it. It really is. And, it seems like the West right now is like, sanction them, crush them, defeat them. That is, they're not even willing to say, maybe we did something wrong. Maybe this is not a situation where people were in position to get what they want. Maybe there's a way that we could find diplomacy work better, but that's not the attitude. And everything that's happening is just is absolutely like, there's no reason for it to happen. And therefore, there's this boogeyman that is Russia to blame.
Yeah, and if you look back on the grand scheme of history, right, most of the time is people not trading with each other. And there are zones of control and regions of influence. And that's why Powell said in this IMF thing, he called it friend shoring. And I've never heard that term before, but obviously it would be a smaller group of trade partners, and you shorten your supply chains to those select few in your smaller partnership of trade, or your trade organization. No longer will we have the WTO, the World Trade Organization, but we might have like the AUKUS trade organization, or the EU and Northern Africa trade organization, or something like that, right? So there's going to be these smaller regions of trade, and that is if you go back in history, that is the standard throughout all of history. The thing that's non-standard is these last 50 years where we've had an international order.
So Ansel, I guess just to kind of close this one out, any kind of big themes that you're seeing the rest of this year that you'd want to point out? And I mean, any kind of just like closing words on this panel in general?
For themes, I'll go back to the episode of last week when I talked a lot about CPI and I talked about yield curve inversions and things like that. I do see CPI coming down over the next few months. I think we're pretty much at peak CPI right now, and that is going to change a lot of things. So if CPI drops to 7%, then down to 5%, what is that going to do to the Fed's narrative, right? So we're going to have to figure that out, but I don't see inflation or CPI going hot through the end of the year. I think it's going to come down pretty dramatically. Other than that, I will just say, I think the global supply chains will continue to get better. I know that there is stuff going on with China, but we have already learned from 2020, a lot of people diversified their supply chains. And so this time around on the lockdown, I think the effects of a Chinese problem in the supply chain will be much less than it was in 2020. And I think the Russian situation, I mean, it's already outside of many of the news cycles because the ruble has recovered. The economy seems to be doing okay in Russia. And the big fallout is in the EU. It's not actually in the Russian economy. So I think supply chains will get better, but CPI will come down.
I mean, it's hard to believe that there's nothing happening in the Russian economy in terms of fallout, but I'm sure that there's just chaos across the board between everyone who is directly affected by this conflict.
Well, hold on. Let me caveat that. I mean, in the terms of their currency and their commodity prices and things like that. Yes, their GDP is said to, it probably will decrease by about 10% this year, but it won't be completely destroyed like a lot of the EU thought that they could do with these sanctions.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of praise from Lagarde on sanctions and their effectiveness. I think that it's a lot more overblown, and it's definitely a double-edged sword, right? It is, when you sanction, it's like blocking someone on Twitter. When you block them, you can't see their stuff, they can't see your stuff, right? So it's a two-way street. It's affecting both parties. And that's going to have effects. These are complex systems that are heavily intertwined. So again, I question these central bankers. I question their understanding of these systems. We didn't go through the clip, but there was a clip that was going viral on Twitter earlier of Kristalina. Again, I mentioned it earlier, talking about how they don't necessarily think through the second and third order effects of their decisions. And that's obvious, guys. It's obvious. And they're freaking wrecking things left and right. That's why Bitcoin, that's why we pay attention to them here at FedWatch. Ansel, I mean, in terms of what's going around in the US, we haven't really talked a ton about that. We haven't talked a ton about like the COVID lockdowns in China. I do think that if we have to kind of talk here for 3 or 4 more minutes, it is interesting to point out that, this time around the world is a little bit more diversified away from China. And we're seeing like horror stories of lockdowns in Shanghai and things like that. And then on the flip side, there's massive public events in the West, especially in the US, where we're seeing kind of like immunity to this overreach a second or third time around. I don't know if I'm praising the West too much today, but I'm kind of curious what your interpretation of this East-West, China versus US kind of reactions to the COVID developments.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Sorry, I hit my mic there. You hit the nail on the head with the diversification of the Chinese supply chains. And if they haven't done it yet, they at least have plans to do it. And they've thought through it. They've run some of the, cost benefit analysis of doing it in many of these companies. And so as they see these supply chains breaking down once again in China, they're going to have a much better idea how to handle it now. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be nearly as big of a deal. Plus, we have demand slowing in the United States. So yes, we have a shortage coming from China of goods, but we also have demand falling in the US. So I think the effects of this will be much less. You also mentioned the West and not pursuing similar lockdowns, or maybe that they have seen the error of their ways and they won't pursue similar lockdowns. But I kind of, I've been talking about this pendulum idea for a very long time, where the progressives got so far on one side that it's bound to swing back the other way. And now we see things like Netflix crashing in value. Some people say it's because of like woke type programming. Then you have CNN Plus crashing and burning, which is, obviously a propaganda arm of progressives. And you see Disney getting kind of smacked around down here in Florida. And then we see Twitter getting taken over by Elon Musk. So those are just four major things happening just in media that tell me that this I guess, public appetite or public resistance to this type of hardcore lockdowns is really taking shape, and it's not going to happen again because the pendulum has swung back and people are waking up to the power that they actually do have in the role of politics.
So we've seen a lot of, let's just call it yuan and China simping from elite leaders in the global financial space. Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and many, many more. Why are you bullish on the West? Again, like when I see Shanghai and see like the horror threads that journalists are posting from there, like there's no reason to the reaction of the state. It's almost like an autoimmune disease to some degree. And I'm kind of curious, like, I agree with you. I'm bullish on the West, at least to some extent throughout this. I'm not going to simp China and the yuan, but what's your logic here? And then we can wrap it.
Well, some people might say I'm simping for the US, but I think that the US in particular, my position is the US is best suited for the coming couple decades, not necessarily the West in general, the US. I think Europe is going to have major problems. We already see some, like Jeff Schneider on Twitter, he talked about that there could be an ulterior motive behind some of these lockdowns in China. And I responded, I said, scary version is that this is some political opponents of Xi trying to stoke civil unrest. And I don't know. I think that most other places in the world are going to have a very hard time in deglobalization and in the credit collapse, but the US is not perfectly suited. We're not perfectly insulated from it, but we are the most insulated economy. So that's why I'm bullish on the US in particular and not the West in general.
Gotcha. So bullish on the US in particular. You are my favorite US and USD and Tether simp, Ansel. So you brought a lot of signal with that position, but let's just call it what it is. You're a simp. And yeah, y'all Bitcoiners, come here to FedWatch, come listen to me just ramble about central bankers being bad and Ansel simping the US dollar. That's what we got today. Follow me at CK_snarks. Ansel, where can people find you?
Bitcoinandmarkets.com. I do a podcast there. I also do a free weekly newsletter every Friday. So go to bitcoinandmarkets.com and sign up for the free membership.
All right, y'all. Let's send it back to the crew.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Thanks, CK and Ansel.
What is up, guys? We are back and we are bringing you some news and notes. Myself, Alex McShane, and Chris Alamo are going to be breaking down some news stories all across the world as it relates back to Bitcoin. And we're going to start with arguably the biggest news story out there, aside from the fact that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving got a nice little sweep. Had to plug that in there. Elon Musk is now the owner of Twitter, where pretty much 99% of you spend way too much time on. On the surface level, this is really exciting. It also is, I think, stirring up a lot of reactions on both sides of the spectrum. People are upset, people are crying, people are rage quitting. And at the same time, people are euphoric, excited about what this could mean. Firstly, just on the idea of free speech and allowing Twitter to be that sort of town square where anyone can say what they want to say. I think we're opening that door up. Alex, I don't know if you have a different take on sort of that aspect of this deal.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't think Paraj was the most outspoken leader. Didn't hear a peep out of him since Jack stepped down. So I'm very happy to see, someone as probably the most famous person on the planet right now, Elon, take over. He's a good memer. Has a good understanding, like can take a joke, is not like some woke, totally brainwashed sheep. I do have some concerns, like chiefly among them, he demonstrably doesn't understand Bitcoin. You can't have a freedom platform without freedom money. I think Twitter should immediately put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, start using Lightning micro payments to verify users and get rid of these spam bots once and for all. And as we've talked about, the way that would work is you make a small deposit, very small deposit. It could be a couple bucks, could be, I don't know, 50,000 sats. What is that, like $20?
$20.
And yeah. And then, that filters the signal from the noise, because you can't just there's no consequences in cyberspace right now for DOS attacks, spinning up virtual machines, spinning up fake accounts. So you have to put some kind of friction in that system. Bitcoin is great at introducing digital physical conservation laws into cyberspace, and I think it should be applied here. I would, Saylor and Musk have some sort of relationship. I think that idea will be received by Musk. I don't know if it'll be implemented, but that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to a Bitcoin adoption by Twitter as a company, and like the first implementations of Bitcoin as something other than a monetary rail, and usually really being used as a tool. I won't say for the first time, but in an effective way. The risk here is that Elon hasn't done his homework on Bitcoin, and you never really know what he's thinking. So you might see like Dogecoin, like more NFTs, more bullshit on Twitter, which is not the route to freedom. So I just want to see his actions back up his words here, and for this to become really a freedom platform.
I want to expand a little bit on like the idea of incorporating Lightning into Twitter, but first I want to let Chris comment on just the overall fact. Okay. And we'll wait on Chris's comments. I want to ask you, Alex, would you prefer to see Lightning just incorporated into Twitter, or would you rather see Twitter rebuilt as a layer 3 application above Lightning?
Well, I mean, Twitter already uses Lightning. Send me some money to my Twitter account via Lightning. I don't think send Bitcoin Magazine some tips. I don't think Twitter is like a viable layer of Bitcoin at all. I don't think Twitter as we know it now can bring anything to Bitcoin. But just in terms of a platform that I have like a lot of stake in, I do a lot of business on Twitter, I spend a lot of time on Twitter. I just don't want to see Elon ruin it. And I think like it's an obvious first move to just put Bitcoin on the balance sheet for the company. I don't know what the hell was wrong with the board that they haven't done that already, but you need to get rid of all those stakeless boomers who, I don't know, you might be able to verify this. Q don't the actual board members at Twitter, like, they don't really have that much of a stake in it?
No, most of them don't.
Yeah, what is that bullshit? Like, get rid of those guys, you know?
Well, I mean, now that it's a private company, Elon can restructure sort of that board to be whatever he wants it to be. There doesn't necessarily have to be a board governing Twitter anymore. It can just be
Yeah,
3 people that he deems worthy to sort of handle day-to-day operations.
Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, and then Elon Musk can have some sort of small role. I don't know, as the meme lord.
Look, I don't hate any of those 3 guys having a say or controlling Twitter. I genuinely don't. I think it's for the net benefit of Twitter. However, there's also other things that all 3 of these men are working on. And to a degree, do we feel like taking away from their other projects or their other endeavors diminishes what they can accomplish there by now adding Twitter to their plates? I mean, this is why Jack very loudly, in my opinion, exited Twitter to do exactly this, focus 100% of his efforts on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I was like kind of joking. I don't think someone like Saylor has any interest in running Twitter. I don't know if Jack wants to. I've never met Jack. I don't know. But he often cites this as one of his biggest regrets, being Twitter, being the directions it should have gone that it did not. And there's a path to redemption here, and very obvious to the world. You know, come back, fix the thing. You change it completely, like revamp it, rename it. I don't care. Just make it a play. You have an opportunity to reach billions of people with Bitcoin and Bitcoin exclusively, and that's my only interest in Twitter, really.
Chris, I'd love to have you sort of chime in now that you're able and all set up.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Can you guys hear me?
Don't say sorry. You're literally running the show.
Yeah.
Who's running the show right now, guys?
Don't worry, I got all the monitors. They look like Neo from the Matrix with all the screens up in the background that you guys don't see. No, I mean, I think it's a good thing ultimately. Well, I guess I'm on the fence. I'm like all happy that Elon's taking control of it. I think he's going to care more about it with having a larger stake. Exactly to Alex's point, the previous board like didn't have a lot of stake in the company, or very minimal by comparison. I guess the one thing that was a little concerning was when Musk, maybe it's just in his trolling, memeing kind of way, he's like, oh, let's authenticate all humans. Like, I'm all for like verifying users to make sure they're not a bot. But at the same time, I hope that doesn't like cater in KYC all users. I know there's plenty of people that want to use Twitter anonymously or pseudo-anonymously. That's their benefit. I know a lot of journalists, this is a more serious note, use it anonymously because if they were to announce who they are or where they're located, quite literally these tyrannical governments could persecute them in very harmful ways. So when he says authenticate, I'm kind of cool with the Saylor route. I think is a fair compromise. You're putting up stake of a little bit of Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could be $5 or however many of sats, 50,000 sats, 10,000 sats. That remains to be determined. But basically a one-time fee that like kind of authenticates you not as a bot, but as a real human being or a person behind that keyboard. I know there'll have to be exceptions because there are bots that are helpful, like the timestamp tweet a lot of people use. There's a bot for like saying the weather. So there's certain companies that already have deals to Twitter. I guess it would be like you'd grandfather in these certain ones. I'm sure it'll break. You see that in programming that some people are like, hey, this bot was banned, but it shouldn't be. Or maybe even if you set up the bot once, you're like, hey, it's my one-time $5 fee.
Well, you don't even have to ban them. You just choose as a user to mute them.
That's true. That would be a cool, like, kind of Saylor's orange check mentality. But ultimately, I think this is a good thing for Twitter. I guess your takes on this. Isn't it very interesting that a lot of people are in an uproar that like Elon's buying it? But like when they're like, billionaires can't own this. But like since the age is old as time, or the tale is old as time, like if you look at Mark Bernioff owns the Times, Jeff Bezos from Amazon obviously owns the Washington Post. There's like a list of all these billionaires that own these all these other platforms, and what Ted Turner for CNBC and all those. Like, so it's weird that like Elon, I think it's just because they can't control him, and Elon's a little bit of a loose cannon. They don't know what he's going to get. So I think that's part of the reason they're like worried about him owning Twitter. But I'll leave it to you.
The centralization of power continues. I did want to like touch back on like one thing you're saying. I'd like totally agree with you. I don't think we should go the surveillance state route of making everyone verify themselves with their identity. When I'm talking about verification, I'm talking about like you literally just put a little Bitcoin up to like as a deposit, which you'll get back when you exit Twitter. Hopefully, that's how I hope it would work. But yeah, like I'm currently verified on Twitter with a fake name, and it's great. I want to keep it just like that. I don't want to have to put any documents or bullshit forward to verify myself as a human.
There was something you said, Chris, that I think is impossible and just it won't happen. And the idea of grandfathering in some of these bot accounts, because let's be real, what Elon Musk wants to do is give us an edit button, and he wants to get rid of that account that's tracking where his private jet is flying. Like, he's not grandfathering that account in, saying, okay, no, he's fine. Like, no, he literally paid $44 billion to take the smoke off of him. Joking though, there is also just, I think, a larger thing that you kind of touch on, this idea that we've been witnessing private hedge funds and high net worth individuals buying up local newspapers. You were talking about like national newspapers, but they've also been doing this at the local level as well. Like, and they've been doing very quietly. Elon Musk was loud about it. He like brought attention to the fact that he's going to do it. And I think for good reason. I think Elon Musk doesn't really give a damn what we have to say. I'll be the first to say, no, do I think that he sold his shares of Tesla back in December because of the Twitter poll he posted? Of course not. Like, he did it as part of like a rollout system of, let's see what the public thinks of this, even though I'm going to do it regardless. So there are these actions I think that he does, that he has plans to do. And then there are ways he frames it for the public to see. And we're still in that moment where he's framing certain things, and we have not yet seen how things play out. I think it's more detrimental to society that local newspapers are going by the wayside, and you're not going to see them. I think, what's the proper way for me to phrase this? They're not going to be reporting on things of merit or things that actually the local community value as much as their big money bag bosses are going to dictate to them, hey, we need this type of a story to come out. That is more detrimental to our society than giving everyone the access to tweet about whatever they want and let the spirals that ensue. There are issues on both sides.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to say why the local news?
Well, there's a lot of different stories that pop up from local news that get then picked up further by national news sources. And in the local level, they have only limited resources, but they're much more connected to their local network. So they're able to really uncover the hard facts. And it's not then until their sort of national partners pick up on this story that are then able to feed them more resources to really expand on these stories and really bring it out. That system hasn't really existed since, I think the last story that I was clued in on that followed the system was a story out of Colorado in like 2016, 2017. Where they were specifically highlighting the fact that we're about to be bought by a hedge fund and our entire process is going to change forever. And they were trying to sort of really dive in and expose this. And then for some reason or another, the story got buried and killed. So I think there is an importance to having local journalism that cares about the community, because let's be honest, the things that I prioritize here in Los Angeles are vastly different than what you may prioritize in your home, or you, Chris, prioritize in your home. Like, I actually care about what the water quality is like because I go into the ocean a ton. I don't really think either of you are even considering what the water quality is like, just because that's not even something that you're considerate of. A national news source isn't going to really tell me a ton about that, but more localized news sources are going to tell me what's going on, why this beach now all of a sudden is actually impacted, and why I should prioritize going to a different beach accordingly.
Yeah. I mean, I usually just check the flags of whatever beach that is I'm going into. But I think like to your point, we need to reconsider just in general how these systems work. I mean, we should totally like break up and destroy like Fox and CNBC if possible. These are both like, people seem to have this expectation that they have like a human right to know what's going on in the world. And that's just completely false. Like I don't agree with that at all. I mean, it's probably not fun to be lied to day after day, year after year, but if you haven't learned that lesson yet, these are companies. They're not they're not something like you're paying for with tax dollars that, well, you probably, like, in some ways some of your tax dollars probably do funnel to them, and they should not. But like you gotta like seek out your own trusted sources of information and verify things yourself. So like I agree with Q. Like I think they should be broken down into a smaller level, and something like a microblogging platform is a great place to get news that, I don't know, I don't think it should be run by like a central planner. I don't think it should be fact checked by some sort of like central entity. I think all of these things need to become smaller. Yeah, what do you got, Chris?
Yeah. So, Alex, I think that segues real nicely. I know there's a lot of platforms, especially like this podcast 2.0 movement, like value for value. And for those that don't know, I think we've mentioned it before on here, but value for value would be like if if you like what we're doing here, you could stream us 1 sat per minute or 1 sat per episode or 5 sats per every 10 minutes that you're watching. It's a lot of foundation. I think it's podcast 2.0, use Breeze wallet and I believe, or some type of wallet to link up. And basically, as you enjoy it, you could stream the creator's sats. Obviously, it's still in its infancy right now, but I know it's big into podcasting. I'm sure it'll be coming to video very shortly. Any
I think
comments
that's
there?
I think that's one of the great use cases for Lightning. I think I've talked about before. I'm hesitant to just like monetize everything. Like I don't need Bitcoin to verify my identity, to open my door, to shut my garage. Like but I happily pay and have paid to like Lightning paywalls to access mailing lists, conversations, videos by creators. I think that's a great use case, and I love using Bitcoin to do those things because I know they're not coin clipping. They're not, I don't know if that's the right term for that, but they're not taking some off the top. There's no middlemen stealing effectively from me or like arbitraging some weird communication relationship. I think philanthropy would be a great case. Like you see people like Polte on Twitter that are delivering Bitcoin directly to people he believes who need it. And that's a great thing. Like I would never donate to any of these other charity organizations because how do they exist? They're taking your money. Like their money is not getting to where they're saying it's going, not in whole. And that's a problem.
I want to bring up something, if I may, that kind of off topic, but on topic of Elon and what you're bringing up now, Alex. Do you guys remember when, the UN was throwing out, if Elon Musk donated just half of his wealth, like we could end hunger in the world, or whatever BS claim they said. And then Elon genuinely responded asking like, hey, if you can actually explain to me how my money can be used in that way, I'll do it. Like, full stop, I will do it. If we can genuinely save the world, show me how you're going to do it. And they haven't said anything. And I just saw on Twitter, like one of these members of the UN, like calling it out, saying like, what should he have spent the 44 billion on? Like ending world hunger or buying Twitter? And it's like, we're still waiting for you to tell us how you were going to end world hunger with that money. So
you
why
got
don't
to
you
point
focus
out
on that?
That poll did not go as planned because everyone, it was like an overwhelming majority shows that he should buy Twitter.
No, absolutely.
And actually, Q, I actually dug deep onto that not too long ago. The guy did respond. He's like, well, the numbers are kind of an assumption of this, and because Elon was asking questions about, you said transportation here, you said this food, you said this. So he's like, oh, it'd actually be more than 44 billion. And Elon's like, so you're just making this up. Like, like it was just so ridiculous. So Elon obviously, exactly.
They're just grifters, man. Like on the notion of donating, like I'm always a big proponent of like help those who need help. Like I'm in a place of privilege that I can actually afford to do that. Like I'd rather just directly help people. I'd rather just like donate my time from time to time and go to a soup kitchen and like serve people food. Or if I see a homeless person outside of an In-N-Out, every single time I see them, like I buy them a burger too. And I just give it to them. Like that to me is more helpful than me helping these crazy rich people get more money, take half of it for themselves, and then dole out maybe a fraction of the half to the people who actually need it.
Yeah. Donating with your time is so much better. Like doing soup kitchens, like you actually see, it's proof of work. You see your work, where it goes, helping cook the meal, serve them, whatever it may be. Definitely go, like, donating money is important, but spending your time is that much more valuable. Alex, I'll let you go next.
Yeah. I agree with that. I would say any charitable donations I'm making right now are literally just to Bitcoin developers. They need your funds. Do you enjoy this network? Maybe it's time to put up a little Bitcoin. It can just be a couple sats you can send their way. There's Matt Odell has a really good Bitcoin donation dev list. I don't know the website off the top of my head, but I'm sure we can
Open
throw it in the chat.
sats. Yeah, open
There you
sats,
go.
and 100% of the proceeds go right to the developers. You can follow it, obviously, the way that they donate. They were debating whether to do 99% and 1% for themselves, but they said no, in order to keep it open source, 100% go to the projects and you can follow it.
Yep,
Isn't that the
100% of
beautiful
your
thing
donation.
about, isn't
Right
that the
to a
beautiful thing
wallet of a
about
dev.
Bitcoin
Yeah.
donations though? Like, we can see the fact that, hey, this is actually going to them. This is actually being followed through in the way that they're talking about and promising, versus like if you send them fiat, they can do whatever accounting they want to do to make it look like, oh, we this much money went towards homelessness, when in fact, like, that's just the total amount donated. That's not the amount that you guys contributed towards this cause or any of the sorts. So
Yeah, you want to see Opsy TV? I don't know. You want to tip Jeremy for his hard work, or send him some Bitcoin? It's pretty straightforward.
do we feel good? Sorry, keep going.
No, same thing. I was gonna say. I think we've covered Elon pretty exhaustively here. We should move on to another news story.
Let's move on to the other big fish in the sea.
MicroStrategy to allow employees to invest in Bitcoin as part of a new 401k plan. This is in partnership with Fidelity. What are your guys' initial reactions?
Genuinely, I want to know who holds the keys until then.
I would assume Fidelity.
Fidelity.
Yeah, Fidelity. They custody it.
So it's just going to operate as a 401k would. Money goes into it. It's just going to be immediately transferred over into Bitcoin. The individuals can't hold based on the tax laws of the way a 401k works, but there is a lot of trust going on here. There's a lot of trust that Fidelity knows what they're doing, that Fidelity is going to custody your Bitcoin properly. And also, this is one that I don't think we really talk, or I'm seeing a lot in the conversations. There's also trust that Fidelity is just going to exist. Like, if you're in your 30s at MicroStrategy and you're pro Bitcoin, you're like, let's do this. But then you realize, wait a minute, I don't get this for 30 years. Is Fidelity really going to be around in 30 years? And then how that spirals out. I mean, of course, if your bank goes under and your 401k is there, that money is still there because it's FDIC insured. Bitcoin is not.
No, only up to a certain amount. But also, yeah, like we covered this the other day. I'm skeptical of like retirement plans in general. I always cringe looking at my paycheck and seeing, I don't know, some sort of government programs like
Social Security.
yeah. My money's going to some bullshit. Like, I just cash those things out as soon as I can. It's not, there's too much trust involved, like you said, Q. However, in terms of Bitcoin financial instruments for corporations, this is huge. I mean, this is great. There's people like, I don't know, take Chris, for example, that like keep their money in this and they want, a place, they want to invest in Bitcoin as close to Bitcoin as they can. And MicroStrategy before would have been the way to go, but maybe Fidelity is the better move now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that actually segues nicely for me as well. I know Unchained and Swan Bitcoin offer two services. They offer you invest in an IRA SEP. It's a SEP IRA is what it's called. Because I have an LLC set up, I'm allowed to do this. But basically, like, I am employed under my LLC for my side job that I have, that I can create this and that I can self-custody Bitcoin in a multi-sig. And obviously, if I'm moving the funds or sending the funds around before the age of retirement, I would obviously get dinged with using them improperly. I could be taxed on that for an early withdrawal or whatever. But I'm thinking of trying to rotate all of my 401k into my IRA and then converting that IRA into this SEP IRA. I still need to look into it, but I know Swan Bitcoin and Unchained Capital can help me with that. And it looks like it is self-custody. Obviously, I'll probably get a lawyer involved to help me with, he'll probably hold the key, I'll hold the key, and then I'll put the key, the third multi-sig key in a different location as well. So that way we can verify each year for tax reasons, and I don't get hit with any shady things, but I can also, protect my Bitcoin and hold pure Bitcoin myself, not with someone else.
I'm curious if either of you guys feel like Sailor and MicroStrategy are doing a disservice to companies like Swan and Unchained, who are in this ecosystem, who really understand the Bitcoin ethos, and going and partnering with a traditional bank to make this offering.
I can take that real quick. Yeah, Alex, you're muted real quick as well. But I just don't think Swan and Unchained, even though we like them, obviously here at Bitcoin Magazine, they're just not at the scale that a MicroStrategy, that an Apple, that a Walmart, like NYDIG is a better connection. That's obviously who MicroStrategy connected with. And then I think they also use Coinbase, or at least Coinbase in industrial custody or whatever, or industry custody.
Yeah.
Alex, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Swan definitely not at the scale. They got to focus on, building an app, making their Bitcoin buying and selling a little bit more of a smooth experience,
and not giving away their customers' email addresses.
Yeah, not giving away, not getting hacked, not broadcasting what geographical region people are buying from on their homepage every 5 seconds. It's a very weird feature of Swan. Unchained, I don't know. We'll see. I would like to see them scale to be able to accommodate something like this, but I think it's a good thing. I think Sailor understands the fiat legacy finance system, but also just like the major players and banks, and has connections here, and he can really make an impact here, as we're seeing. Like, bringing these sorts of solutions to Fidelity is bringing and onboarding a whole new, it opens the floodgates for new investors. So I think it's great.
Anything else, Q, for news and notes?
I think there's one more news story, right, Alex? Do you want to tee us up for that, or did I misspeak?
Yeah, sure. So there's two things. There's Fort Worth, Texas has become the first city government in the United States to mine Bitcoin. They plugged in like 3 ASICs today, which is pretty cool. I mean, pretty bullish to get some S9s in some kind of office somewhere, through like a blockchain city council, I think they're calling it. So this is like a trial run. So I think the point of this is for them to learn something about the industry as they advertise themselves as, the leading hub for Bitcoin mining. And you see like these outside companies come to Texas. I think it's a great move. It's a pretty cool story. Check it out on our website. The other story, I don't know if you guys wanted to comment on that real quick.
I do really quickly. Do you feel like, I mean, we talked earlier in the episode with Todd about like the New York mining restrictions that are being put in place, and now we're witnessing a different state kind of be in the forefront and be the first city to actually operate their own miners, try to attract more miners. We know Texas has been a hub. Do you feel like this is going to attract more miners, or potentially now you're creating competition in the mining space with your government, the local government, and then local businesses?
I don't think 3 ASICs is gonna drive anyone out of Texas. There's plenty of power to be had in the huge state of Texas. But no, I think
hope
it's
for my one, man. Give me hope.
Yeah. I mean, they're getting 3. It makes me kind of jealous. I want to get 3 more miners, but I think it's a good step. It's good to have education in the government. I think that will help promote Bitcoin friendly policy. So I'm very bullish on Texas right now.
Chris, you want to add, or should we move on to the next story?
I think you guys hit all the points. Yeah, if you want to move on to the last one.
Yeah, so the last one, the Central African Republic, which I did not know was a country. I'm going to be honest. I had to memorize every country in Africa at one point for like an art history class, and this one did not stick with me. So got to do my research on the Central African Republic, but they've launched a legal framework for the economic use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Probably a bigger story if you live there, but I would just say keep an eye on this. More to come. Let's see. It doesn't really mean anything for Bitcoin at this point.
I also just want to highlight, if we're going to be wrapping up, that last night Chris put together an awesome spaces highlighting the latest update that in the same theme of we may not necessarily need this update now, but in the future, it's going to be released, I believe, tomorrow as a podcast episode. So if you're not subscribed to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast, it's available on all of your platform. Both Jeremy Rubin and I don't remember Casey's name were really just breaking it down, sort of what they see this doing, why they think this is necessary. And there was one comment that Jeremy made at the very end that I thought was actually very thoughtful on his part, and I wasn't really considerate of it, but he highlighted the fact that this process of us talking about the update that we want to push forward into the Bitcoin network, us having this conversation and asking these questions on an open platform like a Twitter Spaces or even just on Twitter is an important part of this process, because this feedback loop that we're receiving helps tell us and guide us in the direction that we need to make changes or we may not need to make changes. So I highly recommend, if you didn't get a chance to join us in the spaces last night, to check it out on the podcast tomorrow.
Yeah, and also look for Namcios's article on Opsy TV, BIP 119. I think pretty good if you need a refresher or you just start curious what all the fuss is about. That Spaces was excellent. I think that was Jason Rodarmer,
Yes.
Rodarmer, something like that. Yeah, follow him on
Casey Rodarmer.
I'm sorry, Casey Rodarmer. Anyway, that was my first time listening to him speak, and he is very, very good at explaining how Bitcoin works on a technical level. So definitely go follow him on Twitter. And shout
Friend
out
of the
Chris
show.
for putting that together.
Yeah, friend of the show, friend of Mark Goodwin. We got to get Mark back on. I know things are he was busy with the magazine stuff, but we definitely got to get him back on before it ramps up again.
Dude's also writing a book. That one I can't wait for.
Yeah.
What's the book about? Is it about Bitcoin?
Yeah. I'm assuming so, at least.
Yeah, great. Awesome.
Gang, I think we are gonna gift one last Sats code, so stick around. Thank you for all who've been tuning in for almost all 3 hours of today's episode. We hope you've been enjoying it. So be sure to keep an eye out. That Sats code is coming out in a moment. But before we wrap things up, we just want to do one last reminder. Tickets for Bitcoin 2023 are on sale now. They are cheaper than any ticket that we've ever offered before. This is going to be the cheapest version of these tickets available for you. You can use promo code FOMO, FOMO, and get 10% off of these tickets before ticket prices start their steady number go up climb all the way up until when the conference actually happens. I cannot confirm or tell you where it's going to happen other than it will be in America, in a city somewhere here.
Or do we know that?
I don't know. I saw someone else higher up than me say that online, so I feel comfortable saying that.
Well, we've got some friends scoping out Mexico today, so just be ready.
This is true. I mean, look, I am all on board with a Bitcoin 23 in Mexico. Maybe if they make it legal tender, that argument becomes very much validated. But until then, I'm just going to be watching the news for those updates. Yeah. Use promo code FOMO. You can also use it at the store to get any swag that we are all wearing, or your latest issue of the Moon Mag, which began shipping and is currently available in Barnes and Nobles. So be sure to check it out. Our friend at the show, Alex McShane, has his own piece in it as well. And there's an interview with Saifuddin Ammous as well. So be sure to check out these awesome articles. The team put a lot of work into this, and we did in fact send a Bitcoin to the moon. Not yet,
yeah.
But it's going.
I just wanted to do a quick plug. If you're in Boston, I'm going to be at the MIT Bitcoin Expo, I believe, next weekend. So come say hi. Should be pretty fun.
Sounds good.
Hey guys, I think that's a wrap. Yeah, Chris?
Yep.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in today. It was an absolute pleasure to hang out with you guys. Be sure to smash that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, and we'll be back tomorrow with a new episode. Stack sats and stay humble.